Good morning, it's 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's a funny one this morning, actually. I tell you something strange, which occurred shortly before I came on air. Things like this discombobulate me slightly. I got a tweet off Mary. It said, I hope Mr. James O'B has a good rant lined up. I'm verging on several myself. Now, if you are kind enough to listen to this programme on a vaguely regular basis, you'll know that I am not unfamiliar with a style of broadcasting that could be loosely described as ranting. There are plenty of things that get my proverbial goat on an almost daily basis. Some days my goat remains ungotten. But, the political landscape in particular, the utterly unnecessary damage that's been done to the very fabric of our nation by some of the most incompetent and unpleasant politicians probably in British history, animates me almost daily. But I read that. I thought, what am I supposed to be cross about this morning? The producer and I had our customary exchange of views, and I'm not going to lie to you, there were no stories that really jumped out as being deserving of the full hairdryer treatment. So now I'm wondering what Mary is thinking of that I have so far apparently missed. Because the story, the stories that are, if you like, dominating the news agenda are strangely, well, they're not what you would call matters of state. Are they? There's a media story knocking about that you'll be familiar with. The Guardian have got a brilliant story about MPs who have shares in companies that perhaps might be affected by political decisions taken by precisely the same MPs. And then you have the coverage of George Osborne's wedding, where a woman chose to throw some orange confetti at them, uninvited. And, of course, the fact that it was orange. Has it actually been confirmed that it was an environmental protest? Are we sure she wasn't just a slightly eccentric maiden aunt who took it upon herself to... You said, well, what do you mean they're not having confetti? That's absolutely ridiculous. I haven't been to a wedding without confetti since 1959. Ergo, she took it upon herself to introduce some confetti to proceedings. She was certainly dressed for the event. It was what a strange bit of footage, which has animated... if not the country, then certainly corners of it, corners of media, and indeed social media. But I wasn't entirely sure why. I saw a lot of people opining from all sides of the political spectrum that it was particularly outrageous, particularly egregious conduct. And then I saw people popping up on Twitter to point out that according to some estimates, 330,000 excess deaths in Great Britain were linked to austerity. And George Osborne, of course, was the godfather of austerity. And then I read about judges being urged to get tough with Just Stop Oil protesters. Ministers and police chiefs, according to the Times this morning, want judges to hand down tougher sentences to deter protesters from disrupting sporting events. This would follow. The disruption of Wimbledon. I think there was a game where tinsel or glitter came into proceedings. We've seen the snooker being disrupted. The cricket was disrupted as well, wasn't it? Did you see that lad? One of the stewards at the cricket, it must have been at Lord's, mustn't it? One of the stewards at the cricket who tackled one of the protesters and got his photograph all over the media as a result, stuck it on his LinkedIn. He was a volunteer at the cricket and he decided that would be a good opportunity to draw a little bit of attention to his search for a job. That's the kind of initiative that I think we should all admire and salute. But that's not the point of this conversation. The point of this conversation is the curious juxtaposition of values, or the curious prioritisation of values. The state of the environment at the moment is, undebatable, right? We've got I know that you could ring into other shows now and go, well, why isn't China doing more? But in terms of having a conversation which involves a modicum of intelligence, the simple political prioritisation or the public prioritisation of issues, it just baffles me completely. It really does. And I'm normally, as you know, all right at working out why the sun comes up in the morning or why we're doing what we're doing or what something means. But I can't quite get my head around this. So there's two stories, isn't there? There's the little one, which is the disruption of George Osborne's wedding. And there's the big one, which is calls for courts to do more to clamp down clamp down on Just Stop Oil protesters in particular, but all protesters in general. And then there's the third question thrown up by the collision of those two, which is essentially, why do they have to do stuff like this before we talk about it? And then when we talk about it, the conversation, I'm trying not to fall into the trap that everybody else falls into, but then the conversation becomes one of two things. It's either, oh, aren't they awful? Or it's, well, yeah, you might say they're awful, but you wouldn't be talking about them if they weren't doing what they were doing. It's a really, really strange one. What's the best way into this? So, look, it's 9 after 10. Let's begin, because it's a Monday morning. It's a bit hot, and we're all recovering from the weekend. Some of us wrote 6,000 words this weekend, but, that's not necessarily a milestone that everybody had to pass. But you've got this question of, how bad was what that woman did? 0345 6060 973. This won't detain us for the whole hour. But at the end of last week, we were all talking about an astonishingly scurrilous email that had apparently been sent to everybody on the guest list for this wedding. I'm told police have now been called in to investigate alleged online harassment, and the identity of the person who sent the so-called poison pen email is apparently known to the ex-MP and his fiancée. But some people said, a friend of mine said to me when I came into work on Friday morning, said, there's no way that wedding's going to go ahead now, not after this email is doing the rounds. And I said, well, we don't know it's true. The details in it, we don't know that they're true. And we wouldn't call off the wedding. But it's amazing how quickly the world turns, isn't it? 24 hours later, everyone's talking about the fact that an unidentified woman, not affiliated with Just Stop Oil, threw some confetti at a wedding. And for the next 24 hours, nobody could talk about anything else. So let's begin with the question of that incident. What did you make of that incident? All right, it's not the most earth-shattering story we'll ever discuss, but I am in one of those rare moments when I don't quite understand what all the fuss is about, and it probably means I'm missing something. So you had people from the Labour Party, people from all over the shop queuing up to condemn this woman for throwing some confetti at a wedding. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And then we're going to have another crack at the greatest question of our time, which is this remarkable gulf between the passion and conviction of Just Stop Oil protesters and other climate protesters. And there's three people in this marriage, isn't there? There's the protesters, the passion and conviction of the protesters. There's the huge disproportionate disapproval from the media, the newspapers in particular, queuing up to condemn the protesters. I've always missed the boat slightly on the motorist constituency. It's odd for a radio presenter because so many people listen to the radio in their car that one surefire way of building up your fan base is to be furiously cross on behalf of the motorists. And I know what it's like to be stuck in traffic, but I don't know that we've ever quite nailed that part of the audience down on this programme. But you've got that hugely disproportionate disapproval in the media. You would struggle to think of a major platform in the UK media where Just Stop Oil protesters are given the benefit of the doubt, where they begin from a position of good faith, where the cause is perhaps recognised as being so important that the tactics are secondary to the urgency of the situation they describe. It never happens, right? It never happens. And I find that a little bit odd. And then, if you're interested, then I get worried that I'm going in the other direction for sort of reasons of contrariness rather than for reasons of conviction. So you show me a story, particularly about public protest, where 90% of the UK media is all screaming abuse at the protesters rather than the people responsible for the crisis that they're protesting. And a little bit of me, my inner schoolboy, I suppose, starts pushing in the opposite direction and think, well, I better stick up for the protesters. But then I start worrying because I am a bit a bit sad like this, then I start worrying that I'm being motivated more by the sort of underdog element or the swimming against the tide element than I am by genuine sympathy for the protesters. And then I remember what they're protesting about, and I think, oh, shut up, James, get on with it. This is obviously hugely important, and no one yet has really nailed down the problem or the question of why the protests remain a bigger story than the crisis. So there it is. Why are the protests still a bigger story than the crisis? That's all I want. I don't want you to tell me about how much greenhouse gas India releases into the atmosphere or how much fossil fuel is used in China. I just want to know, because they're excuses for not caring enough. They are not reasons not to care. They are excuses for not caring. It's a crucial distinction. Why do the protests continue to attract way more attention than the crisis being protested? I still don't know. And that, I'm going to stress, is the question that I want you to answer. So if you've rung in already, thank you. It may not have got to the question that I'm actually asking yet, although there are two. Your straight up response to the story of the woman throwing the confetti. What did you make of that? That's the shallow end question this morning. But the deep end question is, why do the protests continue to get so much more attention than the crisis being protested? And a few of you agreeing with me that it is, certainly from their point of view, deeply felicitous. Martin Bracknell picks up on this, that we went from discussing that scurrilous email to discussing a woman who threw some confetti at a wedding, apparently not affiliated with Just Stop Oil. It's almost like, so listen, if you all right, I'm not suggesting for a minute that they did this, but if I was George Osborne and I was worried about media coverage of my wedding being dominated by references to the scurrilous email which the police are investigating, I might have asked my Auntie Sue to throw some sort of Just Stop Oil flavoured confetti at us as we came out of the church. I'm absolutely 100% certain that he didn't do that, but it's all turned out rather nice for them, hasn't it? So there's two. The shallow end question, what did you think of what that woman did? 0345 6060 973. And the deep end question, the question that I should ask even more often than I do. I think it's the absence of an answer that dispirits me so much. Pause, think, answer. Why do the protests, the peaceful protests, continue to get much more coverage and attract much more negativity than the planetary crisis, from a human point of view, the existential crisis that they are protesting against? 0345 6060 973. It is 19 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are asking a little question and a big question. The little question is, what exactly do you think about the woman who sought to disrupt George Osborne's wedding by throwing orange confetti at him and his new wife? And indeed the reaction to it, the responses to it. I'm close to a what's going on moment on that question. But much more importantly, why do protests continue to attract much more attention and disapproval than the planetary crisis that is being protested against? I hope that's not a silly question, but we'll soon find out. Alex is in Newcastle. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on again. It's absolutely not a silly question. So there's a few different strands to it as far as I can figure out. The first one is in relation to other forms of media, of not reporting on the climate crisis properly.
How do you mean?
For example, the BBC, when they said we're going to surpass this very critical 1.5 degree limit and by 2027, there's a 98% chance that that's going to happen.
Yes.
Scientists have said that this is a huge threshold. If we pass this, we're reaching horrible conditions. They said it's just going to rain more between April and September in the UK. That's all they said. They didn't talk about crop failures. They didn't talk about
Why do you think that is?
Well, really good question. I think a lot of it is
I haven't checked. I haven't checked that your account is entirely correct. I know Roger Horrobin, the former environment correspondent, who now has a slightly different job title. I've heard him on the BBC giving chapter and verse on climate change. I've heard him going into enormous detail. So I mean, I don't know where you're deriving that analysis from, that all they talked about was rain. But you're suggesting that the BBC deliberately underreports the scale of imminent catastrophe.
Yeah, so like, for example, their documentaries are fantastic about this, but the mainstream report is just sort of treating the climate crisis as just any other issue. We talk about it once in a while, that's fine. This is the biggest crisis that humanity has ever faced. We're literally talking about millions of people in the global south dying every single year. Billions of people are going to be affected around the world over the next 20, 30 years. This is the biggest crisis anyone has ever seen. And they're sort of treating it like another issue. So I think that's a large part of it. And then the second thing I wanted to say was about the protests in particular. If you do things that are too popular, it doesn't get reported anywhere near as much than if you do something which they can villainize you about.
Right.
So I've been thinking about this. Like, for example, Extinction Rebellion, they had 90,000 people outside Parliament Square in April.
Yes.
The biggest mass mobilization event in climate history in the UK. And yet it didn't really get anywhere near as much coverage as when people could villainize that Eddie guy from Just Stop Oil who threw powder over the snooker.
Yes.
So I think a large part of it is trying to find that balance between getting it to be controversial enough.
You're obviously onto something. That's a little bit, I'm thinking of it from the media perspective. So that's the difference between dog bites man and man bites dog, I think. I guess 90,000 people protesting is actually dog bites man. It's, great, it's a protest, but there's no actual news to report except it is happening, and here is the statistical number. And then there's something more sensational about the disrupting the snooker. So that moves a little bit closer to the man bites dog territory. And therefore it's not being reported differently because of a hidden agenda or because of an innate bias. I
do think there is a bit of a hidden agenda, though. I don't want to sound conspiratorial.
Don't worry.
But honestly, the climate crisis does not get reported anywhere near as much as it should, considering how big it is. Like, all of the scientists, every single person knows how bad the climate crisis is right now, right?
Yeah.
And yet, still, whenever there's wildfires in Canada or something, it still gets constantly reported as the climate crisis.
Do you know what else you've got here? I tell you what, and this is pretty grim. Actually, you've got algorithms. So if the report, so this again, I've got to stop saying chicken and egg, but it is chicken and egg, because again, if the public were as engaged as you are, then the media would be reporting it a hell of a lot more, because we would all be clicking on it and we would all be reading it. So that's why I reject the hidden agenda notion slightly. I grant you that impartial,
I see what you mean, James,
organisations should be trying to sort of act more in the public interest than according to what the public is interested in. That's a crucial difference. But the climate change reporting, hang on, let me get this out. The climate change reporting would be absolutely everywhere if people cared about it as much as you do.
Yes, I do fully agree. Obviously, it would. But I think, like, for example, if we look at the COVID-19 pandemic,
yes,
nobody really wanted to hear that much about it.
They did.
Forget it.
No, they did.
But ideally, we'd love to forget it. But it's the same way with the climate crisis.
No, sorry, that doesn't work. I mean, I was here. No one wanted to talk about anything else for at least the first 4 or 6 months. Literally, no one wanted to talk about anything else.
I think the media has a responsibility to try and make it more engaging. Like, there's so many stories around the climate crisis that intersects with so many things.
Yes.
The cost of living crisis.
But I'm paid according to listeners.
I know.
If I did this every day, I would probably, even with my skill set and my magnificent callers like you, I would probably lose listeners. And then I would lose my job.
I don't think that's true. I don't think
well, I'm not going to test it just yet. And that's part of the problem, isn't it?
You can relate it to other things. Like, you can talk about the cost of living crisis while also bringing up the climate crisis. You don't need to have an entire segment.
So we need to change the language. Actually, change the vocabulary. And I mean, I can see that it doesn't. I'm not going to keep talking about circles or chickens and eggs, but it is obviously the case that if everybody cared about it as much as I would say we should, then the news would be... But would it? Because you could have a week of talking about nothing else, nothing changes, you get to the second week, why are we still talking about this? Listen, if I were to draw a parallel, it would be with something like a missing person, which is going to be dominating the news agenda on Monday. But by Friday, whether the person has been found or not, it's going to be drifting down the news agenda. It was more important on the Monday than it was on the Friday. So even if we managed to get it front and centre, then it couldn't possibly stay there. But why? I love the why of it. Thank you, Alex. The perfect start. Steve's in Guildford. Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, morning. Yeah, when they're attacking these sporting events, you just got to look what sport events are attacking. Wimbledon, Lords, that's where they're ruling the elite. That's their games. That's
snooker?
What they sit and watch.
Snooker?
Yeah, I think that was an easy target, but I think...
hang on a minute. I'm just suggesting it's not traditionally perceived as being up there with polo and Test cricket, is it?
No, but it's got a huge TV audience.
Yes. So that's why they did it.
That's snooker, but I think the Lords and Wimbledon was because that's a ruling elite. That's the top 90% that control all our media, all our massive companies. Most of them have probably been MPs and should have been sat in the House of the Parliament to be watching cricket. And I think that's why they went there.
No, I'm going to disagree with you, but in a very friendly way. They went there for the same reason they went to the snooker. It's because of the TV cameras.
Well, maybe, but I'm not being... Cricket's not on special telly anymore, is it? So I don't think the audience in the cricket...
No, but the footage gets on the news. The footage gets on the news.
Yeah, it does. It does. But again, it's because it's highlighted because of the people who sat watching it.
Well, maybe. Listen, I'm not going to fall out with you over this. I don't think you're right, but I'm perfectly happy to broadcast your view. Why do you think that the protests draw so much more attention than the actual crisis?
Well, governments can change things.
Can they?
And we, well, we can vote. We've got to vote, and Labour Party just pulled £14 billion worth of. So really, we're up against it from day one.
Doesn't look like Labour are going to be galloping to the rescue. Depends on what coverage you read. There were reports at the weekend that Keir Starmer had said that he doesn't like or he hates tree huggers, which I need to clarify.
That's what I'm saying. They pulled their package of £14 billion, which they promised.
Yes. But they're still accused. They're still accused that the plans that are still there are unaffordable. So that's what I mean by give and take.
And if we go and have a protest like the old Poltex riots or protests, and we're all going to get arrested because they changed the law. We can't do it no more.
That's true. But the poll tax was dropped largely as a consequence of protest.
Yeah.
So what was different then? What was different then, Steve?
What, the poll tax?
Yeah. Why did those protests, which were often close to violent as opposed to peaceful?
Some of them were quite violent, but it was such a civil unrest. There was such bad feeling, and the government sort of was in trouble anyway. And they said, "Oh, hold on a minute," because it was
wind it in.
We just gone through the unemployment, Maggie Thatcher shutting everything down and building the Square Mile in London. And everyone thought, you know what, this is enough.
So how do you turn that then? How do you turn the climate crisis into an issue as burning? That's quite a good word to use, actually. As burning as the poll tax. How do you get people as animated by, if you like, planetary jeopardy as you did by personal financial jeopardy? Or perhaps you can't. Perhaps we're always going to care more about our immediate circumstances than we are about bigger pictures.
Well, personally, I think there's a lot of what's it we're looking for. The country is protest-wise, it used to be a lot more sort of with strike action, with everything. It was a lot more straightforward and there's a lot more purpose about it. I think we've just got a little bit too soft and a little bit too settled in our lives. Oh, well, I get complacency, and that's why I think that's really we're so shocked. That's a really good point. So we're so shocked by the protest now because we're so unfamiliar with the practice of protest. We've lost how to do it. We've lost how to be radical. That's our trouble. That's really interesting. And of course, the government are desperate to clamp down even on the bits of protest that are still permissible, the bits of protest that are still successful. Crikey, I hadn't thought of it like that. I hadn't thought of it as being towards the end of a process rather than the beginning. Steve, thank you, mate. 10:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. 10:34, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. No one yet. You're all in the deep end this morning. Isn't that interesting? I'll give you a little opportunity to have a splash about in the shallow end. What do we think of that lady that disrupted George Osborne's wedding with confetti? It's a phrase I never thought I'd say. But we're all going in on the heavier question, which is why is the
protest against the crisis, traditionally, historically, constantly getting way much more attention, almost all negative, than the crisis that is actually being protested. And I mean, there are links. I tell you what, the net zero stuff. If you look at the think tanks and the media and the individuals who combined forces to bring about Brexit and Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, they're not even pretending that the next target is attempts to avert or minimise the climate crisis. So I make of that what you will. That's going to be part of the answer. 10:35 is the time. James is in Norwich. James, what would you like to say?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Yeah,
it's
fascinating actually, James, but also exceedingly worrying. I mean, you've obviously know about the film Don't Look Up. It's
yes.
Like we've got all these major stories breaking around the climate, around the destruction of nature, and yet people want to focus on, or the media want to focus on, celeb culture half the time, or some banal incident where somebody throws confetti at a wedding. I'm not really not sure.
The celeb culture's different. Celeb culture's different. That's we all love gossip. We always have. But the
Yeah,
protest, the protest being bigger news than what is being protested. That's the bit that wrinkles
let's think
the brow.
about that for a bit. So I think you sort of hit the nail on the head a little bit earlier about talking about listener numbers. But
Yes.
Let's translate that to the likes of the Daily Mail and the Times and these big newspapers and TV stations where they're owned by the billionaires. You had Rupert Murdoch having cosy chats on the sofa this weekend with Keir Starmer because he thinks he's going to be the next Prime Minister. I mean, what is Murdoch's agenda here? He wants to maintain the status quo. He's got obviously investments in the fossil fuel industry.
Yes, he has got some exposure in the fossil fuel industry, but why are the readers so susceptible to this sort of manipulation? Because listen, I'm a big fan of plutocracy being blamed for an awful lot of our ills, because I think it's responsible for an awful lot of our ills. But the people listening to this programme would not continue listening if I talked about this every day, or even if I talked about it 3 or 4 times a week, and they're not being manipulated by billionaire media owners. I'm not getting instructions from upstairs to steer clear of this or steer clear of that. It just doesn't happen. So why do my listeners not want... You wouldn't either, James, but to be honest, mate. We can all get on our high horse about Rupert Murdoch, and I frequently do, so please don't think I'm having a swing at you, but you wouldn't listen if it was the same topic every day, even though it's by far the most important topic that faces us as a species at the moment.
Do you think there's something about instant headlines and the need to be constantly having 24-hour news, which means we constantly need to find something else for somebody to be attracted to click on, or something to be spoken about? But at the end of the day, the media do control that narrative. They have the decision to make about what they want to cover.
But we haven't stopped talking about the protests. They're going to get news all the time. I suppose that would peter out if they were successful. Well, would it though? Because it actually impacts on my life today, now. You stop me getting home after the show. You disrupt the snooker. You mess up my day out of the cricket, only for 5 minutes. You disrupt a wedding that I'm watching on the telly. It's that you're providing news. The protests provide news. The crisis, in a sense, doesn't.
It was really interesting, I think it was last week or the week before, where some news stations, which I was listening to some of these spokespeople that come on, and they were being accused of, look, your tactics means we're only talking about your tactics and not the crisis. I think the spokespeople have been trying to say the opposite for so long. So can we get climate scientists on? I mean, John Kerry was saying on the when he spoke about what scientists are saying now, and we're in terrifying and uncharted territory. So, don't talk about the tactics. Talk about what the scientists are saying and get them on the news.
Well, you know that Tuesday was the world's hottest day on record, and it beat the previous hottest day on record, which was Monday. That's just last week. But I'm looking at that on literally just Googling hottest days on Earth. The Smithsonian Magazine, Today, which is, I think, the Australian programme, ABC, again in Australia, Unilad, The Washington Post, Live Science, CBS News, on a Google search in the UK, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The 8th story is a UK media outlet, and it's The Guardian. And then you've got another 2 more American outlets. So even there, something different is happening and I'll go back to your Murdoch point, in the territories where Murdoch has influence, the stories possibly get sat on even more than they do in other countries. But this is the United Kingdom. You're searching for the hottest day. How many people listening to this right now know that last week, I think we had the 3 hottest days ever recorded?
Yeah.
Well, 4 possibly.
Records broken. Yeah.
Did you know that?
Yeah, well, absolutely, yeah. And it's the
4
hottest week
days in
on
a row.
record.
Last week, the planet reached its hottest day ever recorded. But hey, did you see that woman at George Osborne's wedding, mate?
That's just incredible, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah. It really is.
Yeah.
I wasn't even sure it was 4 days. I thought it was 3. Before you go, much more important than the climate crisis, are you familiar with Epic Studios in Norwich?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I've been to a few gigs there.
Now, is it in the old Anglia Studios on Magdalen Street?
That's right, yeah, down Magdalen Street.
Right.
Great venue.
Well, I've got some fantastic news for you.
Are you coming down?
I'm there on the 8th of November.
Brilliant, I'll get it in my diary.
Get yourself down. 8th. I hadn't realised it's going to be like a homecoming gig, that, for me. That was where I made my broadcasting debut, was in that studio down in Norwich. And now it's a venue, Epic Studios, November the 8th, in conversation about the new book, How They Broke Britain, which I'm now, for the first time, probably since I signed the contract, I'm now thinking might actually be finished in time, which is a pretty good feeling. But I hadn't realised. That's so exciting for me. That's where we used to do the right stuff with Matthew and Kate Silvers and the three of us for about 18 months, sat there. First ever job in broadcasting. It was a sort of crossover from newspapers. And I'll be going back there, how many years later, Keith? 20-something years later? Gosh, that's nice. I'll get some invitations out. James, take care. Anna's in Leicester. Anna, what's going on?
Hi, James. Nice to speak to you. I'm a big fan.
Thank you. What a lovely thing to say.
Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. I might not articulate my point.
Take your time.
Clearly.
I'm sure you'll be brilliant. Take your time. There's no rush.
I just wanted to say that I feel that climate change protesters are seen as lunatics and they're seen as tree huggers, and it's easier for people to portray them like that than to face the reality of climate change. People tend to not, on a day-to-day basis, people don't really bring up climate change in day-to-day conversations.
Do they not?
In comparison to... No, not in...
But you'd be a little bit weird if you did, wouldn't you? I don't know. I mean...
I just feel that because the science is so depressing,
yes,
and so... I feel like there's a lot of climate anxiety going about. Like, for myself, I used to read up a lot about it, and I used to look at the articles, and I've got young children, so I'm really worried about their future.
Yes.
But now, mentally, I can't deal with it. And so instead, I try and avoid those articles, even though I'm fully aware of the situation we face. But I do think, when you were talking earlier about the missing person case and how, at first it's really important in the news and everyone's really interested in it, but then it loses its strength. But I feel like for the climate crisis, it's really, really important for it to continuously be in the news, because unlike the missing persons case, we can actually do something about it. And a lot of articles are very depressing, but I think there should be maybe a shift in focus on what we're actually doing that's right in terms of fighting it. I know it's whatever we're doing is not... Well, for example, someone doing a biodiversity project in their area and how that could be expanded, or, just people are doing
stuff.
Their own
traffic calming, but even traffic calming attempts to reduce traffic or attempts to reduce. I mean, you get a much bigger negative response to the various ULEZ schemes up and down the country, all of which are, of course, supported by government, except the one in London, than you would to the actual urgency of the situation, the people getting late onset asthma or even, of course, dying as a consequence of pollution. People
don't want to change their way of life, and schemes like the ULEZ scheme, I think, should be expanded to all cities. It's so important that we reduce our fossil fuel, our carbon footprints, and we're going to have to change the way that we live. But you stopped reading the stories about that. I mean, with respect, that's... Go on. I still talk to people about it. Yeah. I've told one of my mum friends to turn on and listen.
Have you? What's her name? I talked to her about climate. What's her name? Helena. Hi, Helena. I hope you're enjoying this. It's all right. It's not. It's pretty good. I get better callers than Anna. Don't judge the entire programme just on this one. I'm joking. Thank you for that. And it does matter. But you're right. You've nailed something really important there. It's the don't look up principle, isn't it? I think that James referred to the film. I can't remember whether he named it or not, but that Leonardo DiCaprio film where there's a meteor heading towards Earth, and eventually everyone just decides, let's just carry on anyway and don't look up, and we'll all be fine. If you can't see it, it can't hurt you. That's kind of where we are, isn't it?
Yes, Definitely.
A lot of the time. Anna, thank you. And thank you for bringing Helena on board. I hope we can hang on to her. It's coming up to 11:15. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's weird, isn't it? I mean, that, right, there, Anna's contribution about, not apathy, but almost saturation point. And also, why will I keep reading? Why would I look up? I'm just going to get scared. That's it, exactly. She nailed it. Why would I look up? I'm just going to get scared and depressed and frightened. And what am I going to tell the children? But then you've got the other bit with James, which is, do you know that last week the planet recorded the 4 hottest days on record? The 4 hottest days ever in a single week, all in the same week. But hey, look, someone threw some confetti at George Osborne on his wedding day. That bit there, right there, somewhere between those two, in the middle of that sentence, is the answer to the questions that we ask. Why are we talking about that? And we're not even talking about that. It is 10:49 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think it's your oak tree idea, says Mark in Exeter. What's my oak tree idea? You mean, yes, the difference between aristocrats and the rest of us is that they plant trees because their great-great-great-grandson or daughter will be living in the house then, and the view will be so capable. I mean, it's not just aristocrats. Alan Titchmarsh is a truly lovely guest. Thank you for all the kind words about Alan's appearance on Full Disclosure this week. He said something really profound about just wanting to leave that bit of the planet in a better state than it was before he got here. I thought it was a really lovely thing to say. So you can think about a sort of botanical posterity, but generally speaking, you know, if you're at a stately home and you're wondering, wow, look at that view down to the lake, how did they get that? And the answer is that about 200 years before the view became perfect, someone like Capability Brown envisioned it. Anyway, that's my oak tree theory. Thank you, Matt. I thought you were crediting me with something I didn't know about. We're so used to thinking in the short term. Talking about climate change is like trying to convince frogs that they're being slowly boiled, even though they can't see it and they need to actually change their life. There is something in that, absolutely. Whereas, he goes on, this guy on the news disrupting an event, especially when sports are weirdly sacrosanct in our society, that's someone we can be scandalised by. It's easier to stir negative response than positive motivation. I wonder whether all the times we've spent talking about tabloid tactics, don't really worry about the facts or the evidence. Just approach any incident or issue in the way that is guaranteed to provoke the biggest emotional reaction. You know, so you're just going to go for the biggest emotional reaction. Portray people as being feckless because it will make other people angry. Portray people as being work shy because it will make other people angry. They're swinging the lead. They're taking the mickey. They're getting stuff they don't deserve. I saw the Telegraph going after the Motability scheme this morning, a scheme which helps disabled people afford vehicles or access vehicles that they wouldn't be otherwise able to access. Just come on, flat screen TVs, come on. I wonder whether the climate change is going to be the mothership of all that kind, already is indeed the mothership of all that kind of coverage. I could get you much angrier about a bloke disrupting the tennis than I can about the fact that last week the planet recorded the 4 hottest days ever. Why? Why is that? I mean, why? Why is it so much easier to get you cross about some people slowing down the traffic on the M25 than it is about the fact that the people in charge of the world, whether politicians or plutocrats, the people in charge of the world have just turned the heat up to unprecedented new levels? It's crazy. Anna's on the Isle of Wight. Anna, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
I've listened to you quite a few times, and
thank you.
So please bear with me. I'm a bit nervous.
Of course I will. Take your time.
I heartily endorse what the other Anna said.
Yes.
I'm a bit older than her. I'm of an age to have children and grandchildren. I have neither. If I did have grandchildren, I'd be absolutely terrified for their future. I can't see them living their full life on a sustainable planet.
No.
And when I try and convey to people, they just shrug their shoulders and say, well, we've always had climate change, we've always had global warming. It's a myth, it's made up by the governments, it's this and that. And they will not.
And these are decent people. These are decent people, right?
Yeah.
They're not
Smart
sort of
people.
headbangers.
No, absolutely not. And it seems though they cannot or will not allow themselves to see what's happening because they'd be too frightened. And it's. I don't have the words to convey.
Well, you go to whoever's going to tell you what you want to hear.
Mm-hmm. And it's easier to get your head around a protester or protest than it is the magnitude of what's approaching us unless something happens.
Yes.
And for something to happen, there's got to be a financial incentive. If there's no financial incentive, or they will not do it, there's no money in protecting the planet. And it's big money that rules the agenda.
That's the only hope, really, isn't it? That somehow they manage to properly turn some short-term profit from saving the planet, and then all the forces that are currently preventing us from doing so would probably weigh in behind it. How much does it animate you? Because you can understand when you describe how it makes you feel, the bleakness that you feel about the future. You can understand why people don't want to look it square in the eye, why they don't want to look up, as it were, at the approaching catastrophe.
I'm terrified.
Are you? I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm really... No, that's all right. I'm a bit like that. Was that Chicken Little? The
chicken licking. Chicken licking. Except it's not an acorn. It's not an acorn that's landed on your head. It's See, there's an interesting thing there, Anna, because my human response to you saying you're terrified is to try to reassure you, but that's the wrong. That's the wrong response, isn't it?
Yeah, I've recently joined the Labour Party.
Oh yeah,
and to be honest with you, I'm not totally convinced. I voted Conservative all my adult life.
Okay.
And then I saw the light.
Yes.
But I don't believe that Labour have got the answers. I think it's got to be people sitting together, talking, putting their money where their mouth is.
Yes.
We've got a Prime Minister that flies everywhere he can. What's wrong with getting into a train?
I don't know. I don't know.
No, I don't know. And if he can fly by plane or helicopter, well, why shouldn't we?
Everybody else sees it, don't they? They see it as and similarly, celebrities getting it in the neck for flying around the place in private jets while telling everybody else to minimise. You can see, but again, it's not going to fix anything. It just makes life easier for those of us who are trying to fly the flag or trying to do the right thing. If other people saying that everyone else should do the right thing would do the right thing themselves. Just for your own reassurance, I think Ed Miliband's on side on this. He seems to be a fairly visionary environment politician, but reports this weekend were that he'd failed to impress upon Keir Starmer how important it is to do the things that you would like to see the Labour Party doing. It's a strange time. Starmer's so frightened of exciting precisely the forces that are currently holding us back from properly addressing climate change, the sort of media plutocracy crossover, the increasing danger of him never getting his hands out of his pockets. Thank you, Anna. I don't know what you were nervous about. You played an absolute blinder. I look forward to your next call. Ruben is in Liverpool. Ruben, what would you like to say? Ruben!
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on.
What happened then?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. What happened then? No, it's phone line's weird. The delay's too long on the phone line. Sorry, we'll try and fix it. Janet's in Godalming. Janet, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, Janet.
I'm also terrified.
Why is everyone terrified? I'm a pussycat. Have you never heard the show? Have you not seen the clips on YouTube? I'm a pussycat, Janet.
No, I love your show. I listen a lot. You're very right about Ed Miliband as well.
I hope so.
Shame he's not the leader anymore, right?
Oh, we had our chance.
I've been terrified about the ecological crisis, which is obviously hand in hand with the climate crisis, since I was about 10. I'm now 58.
Gosh.
I remember asking my mum where all the little plastic pots of the yogurts I was addicted to went, and she said, they go in the bin. And I said, I know they go in the bin, but after the bin. And she said, well, they buried them. And I did a few sort of homespun experiments and worked out it wasn't going anywhere. Anyway, long story short...
You're quite an early adopter, as they say, weren't you?
Well, I didn't really get active until XR burst onto the scene, and I suddenly thought, wow, all these worries that were buried about, I worked out that nothing we were doing really was sustainable, but I hadn't articulated it, and suddenly, bang. So anyway, it's interesting, your other two callers, the two Annas, I feel their terror and grief, and I'm just going to say a really good way of channeling that is not necessarily to go and glue yourself to stuff, but there are so many groups springing up now. Not necessarily activist groups, but in our town, in Surrey, there's a climate emergency group, and they go and have a vegan supper every Friday night and just talk.
And that helps?
I think it does.
Yeah, just getting so slowly, baby steps, spreading the word. I think, all three of you have possibly cracked it in a sense, because if you, I don't want to feel bleak and terrified. And so possibly one starting point when you're not talking to people who've already arrived at a similar place, a similar conclusion, we have to find a way of having the conversation that doesn't make me want to turn it off. Do you see what I mean? I mean, that's why the don't look up analogy is so powerful, because if you don't look up, you can pretend it's not happening. And the person who's shouting at you all the time that it is happening, the temptation to tune him or her out is obviously for millions of people, and in some sense for all of us to varying degrees, the temptation is irresistible.
Find your tribe. Find the people who care. Get together with them, because there's strength in community.
And
after
grow.
all, and if a collapse comes, we're left with our community, and after that, our smallest unit, and our family.
Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to say was we did 2 days of campaigning at Wimbledon about Evian, who are owned by Danone, who are being taken to court by Client Earth as being one of the global plastics polluters. They have a very inadequate plan to deplastify. And we sent press releases to 50 newspapers. And we've called you guys, actually. We called your newsroom, and no one was interested.
Nothing
and I think
happened.
It's
because you weren't doing anything. You weren't doing anything disruptive.
There was no glue involved, James.
Yeah, but that's so.
Confetti.
Good Lord.
So I'm not saying that my next move is to go and shut down the M25, but I can see where the frustration comes from other
also
activists.
because you're so correctly persuaded by the power of the evidence you've collected, you can't quite understand why it's not impressing people in my industry. You'd say, no, look, if we don't do this, then this will happen, and look, here's the science, here's the evidence, here's the detail, here's the fact. And everyone's like, oh, look over there, someone just threw some confetti at George Osborne.
Exactly. We did end up on live Turkish television on TRT World. They're a global news station, and they broadcast us from just outside Wimbledon last night, which was, something.
Why? Why did they to pick it up? And not, why do you know why they picked it up and others didn't?
They do a brilliant weekly program called Just 2 Degrees,
really?
Which is, I really recommend it actually to people. It's,
in Turkish?
Really in depth. No, it's all in English language. It's a global news channel called TRT World. I'm just plugging them a bit.
No,
don't worry, I don't work for them. I'm a teacher.
No, you can plug them if you want. That's fine. I mean, Turkey, very state-controlled Turkish media, but that's obviously swimming in the right direction.
This channel is really good on covering climate and ecological stories. They pull out some quite obscure stuff. And I'm glad it was in English, because I thought if it was in Turkish, unless you've got some Turkish, Jan, they might have been taking the mickey out of you or using you as a sort of example of colour at Wimbledon, But obviously the programme is dedicated to drawing attention to what you describe, and the media, up to and including the mighty LBC, was left entirely unmoved by your press release. And yet, if you'd glued yourself to Novak Djokovic, then you'd have been all over the news. So you can see the frustration. That's a perfect illustration of the frustration, actually. Thank you. It's 11:02. It is 5 minutes after 11. Do you know, just funnily enough, following on from the last hour, my apologies to Ruben and Joanne and Jess and John and Emma and Bill and everyone waiting to talk about it. We will, of course, return to it. And I know I say we'll return to it more than we usually do, but obviously we're getting better all the time. But funnily enough, Chris Packham has talked about how the terror factor generated by the new BBC TV series Earth, which recreates the climate change that wiped out most species 250 million years ago, could spur us on to do something about the environment. Packham, who's very much a force for good, Packham presents it. I'm not quite sure when it starts, but that is obviously a great way of focusing the mind on imminent catastrophe by showing us what happened last time. A similar catastrophe was impacting upon the planet, although that wouldn't have been man-made.
affect climate change, not 250 million years ago. 6 minutes after 11 is the time. And another reason why perhaps the problem persists is explained by Boris Johnson in an astonishing juxtaposition of clips that I will share with you shortly. But I want to move on next to a completely different story. As you know, I always wonder what you think about it when I stress that, because I'm a white bloke, right? So I only ever encounter racism from a second-hand perspective. I only ever encounter it from people who are directing it at others. I think probably most viscerally whenever Sadiq Khan is in the studio, and some of the stuff that comes in about him is borderline actionable, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There was a report just last week about the amount of racist abuse that he receives. Politicians probably more than anybody else on a daily basis, on a constant basis, but footballers, of course, during moments of international tournaments usually. We saw that, didn't we, during the World Cup and the Euros, that footballers can be on the receiving end of astonishing amounts of racism. So, you know that worry I always have about bending over backwards to accommodate positions I don't necessarily agree with. I don't know how you feel about me prefacing a conversation like the one we're about to have by pointing out that comparatively and relatively, racism, though a huge and present problem in this country, the UK is actually one of the better places to live if you enjoy and or are part of ethnic diversity. That is according to most available measures. You would be better off here than you would, for example, in France. I don't know whether it is necessary to point that out. I'm beginning to think that it is, because one of the ways that racists try to shut down conversations about racism is by claiming that there isn't any. And one of the ways in which racists try to shut down conversations about racism by claiming that there isn't any is by pointing to other countries and saying, well, it's worse there. Of course, what they're being very disingenuous and dishonest about, because you can't be a racist unless you're a liar. That's a fundamental point of understanding. You cannot be a racist unless you are also a liar. What they're trying to do is pretend that by pointing out that the problem is bigger there, it doesn't exist here. Up to and including the entire government, remember, commissioning a report designed to conclude that there was no such thing in this country as systemic racism. Something so utterly outrageous that you wonder still what the motivation behind it was. Incredible. So I do currently think, but I stress all of this is coming from a white bloke. I do think, before we launch into the conversation like the one we're about to launch into, I do think it is worthwhile acknowledging that this is a problem that we have, but not on the same scale that other countries have. No suggestion that this is a reason to stop caring or take your foot off the gas, but I just want to spike the guns of the racist liars. Do you see what I mean? So it's worse in France, or if you don't like it here, why don't you move to France? Because I want this place to be better than it is. Once you stop trying to improve, you lose everything. Always fighting, always trying to improve things, always. There's a story at the weekend about a school offering up Saturday or Sunday morning classes specifically to black children in a primary school, because it was going to look at specifically black issues and black history. And when I started on this job, when black children were lagging behind in the education system, it was always the fault of the parents. I don't know if you remember that. It was nothing to do with institutional racism in the classroom. It was always the fault of the parents. If, according to some measures now, black children are doing better than they used to do, and white children are doing worse than black children, you can be 100% confident that the people who said it was all the fault of the parents when it was black kids lagging behind will not be blaming the parents for the white kids lagging behind. That's systemic racism. There it is. There's a wonderful example of it. You cover a story about black kids lagging behind at school and claim that it's all because of absent fathers and parental apathy, and then the education system kicks in to redress this imbalance. Black kids start performing better, and the reason why white kids are being left behind is because of political correctness and woke schools. It's incredible, actually, how blatant and transparent these sort of prejudices are. But that is, in case you wondered, that's systemic racism in the media, actually, more than in schools. But we're not talking about schools, and we're not talking about the media. We're talking about the NHS, which over the years that I have been doing this job has perhaps thrown up some of the most insidious or invidious? What do they mean? Anyway, some of the most unpleasant examples of racism to your face. Because I can't quite get my head around that. I've encountered it myself when my mum was in hospital and another patient was adamant that they didn't want to be looked after by a nurse who had brown skin. And I mean, there's two things that occurred to me. Number one is you're lucky to be looked after at all, frankly, if you're going to bring those sort of attitudes into a hospital ward. But the second thing, and this is where you cannot begin to know what it must feel like. This is where, I call it whatever you want to call it, white privilege or insulation, or you cannot know what it is like in that moment to be that nurse. You just can't, can you? I think we had a little bit of an institutional flavour of it, didn't we, last week when, I forget who it was complaining about it was the new group, wasn't it? It was the what are they called, the new Conservatives, saying that they didn't want visas for people from overseas to work in care homes. 165,000 vacancies or something mad like that in that sector, but these geniuses have decided that the last thing we need is people coming here from overseas with perhaps a different attitude to care of the elderly, born of their different cultural values. But we don't want them here. We want to round up the local hooligans from outside the fish and chip shop and get them to look after grandma. I mean, it's just incredible when that level of racism makes its way into public discourse without the people promoting it realising how racist they are. It's just disgusting. But and Morton Morland did a cartoon which really stayed with me, actually, when it depicted two care workers wheeling their charges down a corridor while a kind of brigade of ruddy-faced elderly people were shouting abuse at them. And I just, this morning, oddly, found myself thinking, what would that feel like? You're doing your job. So the Mayor of London, I guess, sees it as par for the course. Diane Abbott, I guess, sees it as par for the course. They shouldn't, but it's, what would you call it, an occupational hazard? Something like that? All right, you're a racist, I'm a politician. You whether you like my ULEZ scheme or my politics or not, obviously the colour of my skin is going to inform your attitude towards me. I've witnessed it. I've seen it in the studio and I've seen it in real life as well. And Diane Abbott gets more abuse, I think, than any other MP. I don't think much of her politics, but I do think much of her politics. I don't think much of her performance in recent years politically, but historically she's a legendary figure, a legendary politician, and the nature of the abuse that she gets completely different to what it would be if she was white. So it's something to do with power, actually, majority power. But anyway, I get that in a sense. If you're a footballer on the screen in front of millions of people, then you know that you become a lightning rod for racists. It's a public form of racism, even though it's personal. It's what I would call public racism. Some of the people shouting abuse at you in a football stadium or on social media would not dream of saying this stuff to your face, right? They just wouldn't. Which is why the NHS stories feel so different to me. It's why they feel so different to me. The president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists gives a valedictory address today to the International Congress, the Royal College of Psychiatrists International Congress in Liverpool. And he will say, Dr. Adrian James will say that the health service has a moral, ethical and legal duty to do more to stamp out racism. He says it affects recruitment, it affects retention of health professionals. Last month, the NHS Race and Health Observatory, which was only formed in 2021, said that better anti-racism policies could boost the NHS workforce. It called for better care, better training, and anti-racist policies to boost staff numbers. This, of course, against the backdrop of a Conservative government still riddled with people who signed up for that ludicrous report suggesting that there was no such thing as systemic racism or institutional racism. Dr. James will say institutional racism is rife in society and the NHS is not immune. He will go on to cite pay gaps, disparities in disciplinary processes, glass ceilings that stop doctors from minoritized ethnic backgrounds securing management positions, and more obvious racism in the workplace. And I just want to know your stories. I want to know what that's like. I think in a slightly sensationalist way, I find myself more interested in those moments where an actual patient seeking your actual care has allowed their bigotry to boil over in your face. What's that like? How can you go back and look after that person? 0345 6060 973. What happened? Your standout example of experiencing racism while working in the NHS. I'd love to hear it. If love's not quite the right word, but I think you know what I mean. And then the broader question, of course, which is a little bit harder to pin down, about disparities in health and social care and pay differentials and promotion opportunities. I think it might be easier to go in on the time it happened to you. So there are two questions. First question is, what happened? 0345 6060 973. But the second question is, what allows you to go back? Someone has abused you like that. If you worked in a shop, you wouldn't have to serve them again. That's a broad generalisation, obviously. And it would depend how rich they were, I suppose. So, there's a great episode of The Equalizer, actually, not long ago, this season, where that is addressed directly. There's a lot of brilliant racial politics in The Equalizer, by the way, the Queen Latifah series that I keep raving about. But in a shop or in a... you see it with historians too. Paul says Satnam Sanghera, who wrote Empireland, and William Dalrymple, who's also a great historian of empire, get completely different reactions, even though they're exploring similar themes from similar perspectives, because Satnam's brown and William's white. I think he went to my school. I'd love you just to talk, because maybe you don't even realise how remarkable you are. But how common is it as well? You're sitting there thinking, oh, have I got a story for James? Or are you sitting there thinking, oh, where do I start, James? Seriously, every day or every week. I don't know. I should know. I'm sorry I don't. But by the time we finish talking, I will. That's why you've got to ring me. And then talk me through the process you go through after some patient has said, I don't want to be treated by the black girl, or something like that. The process you go through to get back in the saddle. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 11:19. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. You're so right about Diane Abbott, James. Imagine if Nadine Dorries were black and hadn't spoken in Parliament for over a year and was moaning about not getting a seat in the House of Lords. It's a very good point, and a timely reminder, actually, that we haven't done Dorries Watch yet today. I'm keeping count of the days since she said that she would be stepping down as an MP with immediate effect. 22 after 11 is the time. Let's get stuck straight into this, because if someone as august as the President of the Royal College of Psychiatrists is adamant about the scale of the problem and the failure properly to address it, then the least we can do is examine the evidence. And we'll start with Hanifa, who's in Battersea. Hanifa, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thank you so much. This is my first time calling into any radio show, so yes. I'm a little bit nervous.
I win.
And I think it's like you said, where do we even start?
Yeah.
But in the interest of time, I'll just give one example that really stood out to me. And it was while working in the trauma unit, and there was a patient who was covered in swastikas. And he would refuse to speak to me, whereas he would speak to all the white doctors and nurses. And
did he say so? Did he say, I refuse to speak to that doctor?
No, he just wouldn't. When I was asking him questions or, trying to provide the care that he needed. And then I think the most thing that stood out to me was I was sharing this with one of my white colleagues.
Yeah.
And he's like, maybe he's having a bad day. He's a nice guy, but maybe he's having a bad day. And for me, that was kind of worse than...
and he was covered in swastika tattoos. Yeah, That's exactly. A lot of bad days, isn't it? They take a while.
Yeah.
Good grief.
then, since then, basically, I lost confidence in even sharing these incidents, which there's many of, and you face them not only from patients, but also from, your fellow colleagues, which is very disappointing. And you just feel that you just have to keep it to yourself, basically, and carry on.
Do you think they don't notice? Or that they I mean, I'm not making excuses for them, but they don't want to notice?
I think it's more a case of it makes them uncomfortable to discuss these issues.
Yes.
So they kind of try to, in the kind of process of making themselves comfortable, they make you even more uncomfortable.
Yeah,
I think that's probably what's going on.
Are you still a doctor?
Yes, I am, but currently doing a PhD, so I work part-time.
What happens when a doctor gets a PhD? Do you become doctor?
You do become doctor, but you don't get paid anymore. So you're still a doctor, and just doctor who's underpaid.
Well, of course. Let's hope that gets redressed soon. And finally, you've mentioned one of the standout examples of what you've experienced. Would you experience microaggressions or aggressions on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? Sorry to be simplistic, but just ballpark frequency question.
I would say on a daily basis.
Oh, really?
And just quickly, having, as much as I would like to treat all my patients equally, but I found myself having to advocate for sort of Black patients or patients that are non-white, for example, when it comes to things like pain relief.
Right.
Again, when I was working at the trauma unit, obviously if you've been stabbed, it's going to hurt. So you find that a lot of the Black patients that have been stabbed, there is no rush to give them any pain relief, and then
the same in the labour wards. We had a phone in about this, I think, earlier this year when the statistics came out that said there's just a perception that people of colour can endure more pain, which is incredible, really.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for what you do. Seriously, I'm sorry for that. I think that even more than the visual image of a tattooed Nazi refusing to be treated by a Black doctor, I think the way you just so casually threw the word daily into the description was even more jarring, but perhaps. Thank you, Hanifa. Jackie's in Mitcham. Jackie, what would you like to say?
I was just thinking about what you were talking about. Now,
well, that's a good start, isn't it, for ringing in? That generally helps.
It does, doesn't it?
Yes. Not everyone does, I've got to be honest. Carry on.
Anyway, I was a junior nurse. I was training. It was my second placement on a medical ward.
Right.
A Nightingale ward. Really hot day, so I'm doing the obs round, so taking observations. Anyway, I'm Black and went to a patient doing these obs, and then he said to me, "Oh, I bet where you come from, it's a lovely lagoon where you can just go and relax."
Lagoon?
So I went, "Yeah, lagoon. Yeah, lagoon." God. And I said, "No, don't think there's anywhere like that in Luton." Right? Yeah. And he was stumped, absolutely stumped. He's like, I said, "What? Why do you assume because of my skin colour? I mean, listen to the way I speak. Do I have an accent or something?" And he couldn't answer me. And then the second incident was when I'd qualified and I was working on a male orthopaedic ward. So this particular patient was on skeletal traction. So basically he's fixed to the bed.
Yeah.
So, and again, really hot day and everything. And I'd said to him on 2 occasions, like we used to have the sewing room so you can get your uniforms altered, anything altered and stuff.
Yeah.
So I said, "Look, if you've got some relatives that can bring in some shorts, we could get the seams taken out, put Velcro down one side. That way he wouldn't be exposing himself. And,
that's nice.
You've got the bed cradle over and, people are visiting. You don't want to see it."
No.
So anyway, it was the third time I sort of said to him, "Oh, Mr. Smith, were you able to get the shorts?" And he just went in on me and used the M word. And that was it. I didn't.
At the end, why?
When I say I lost it, but I lost it in a very direct way.
Yes.
Didn't blink and said, "If you were in absolute agony and I'm doing the job, do not ask me to help you."
Are you allowed to do that? Are you allowed to do that?
Absolutely. I'm defending myself.
Good. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be.
And the fact is that, and I told the senior sister on duty, and back in those days, this would have been brushed under the carpet, maybe if it was a different person that was in charge.
Sure.
But she actually backed me and said no, and spoke to him. And I made it clear I mean, we used to do drugs round in pairs, so whoever's working with me could deal with him and things. But I'm not here to take that. And to be honest, I was very new into my nursing career.
Yes.
And actually it surprised me that I did react like that. I mean, now I'm not taking any of it.
No, of course.
At all.
Of course.
You know, and it's not about just racism. It's just, I'm not there to take it.
Such an odd, I don't want to sound silly, but shouting abuse at someone in a football stadium is easier to understand than using that word to a nurse who is literally looking after you every day. I can't begin to get inside the mind of either of those people, but my God, it's 10 times harder to get inside the mind of the second one.
Yeah.
It just beggars belief. That's prejudice, that's bigotry. Can I ask your opinion on one thing? Because they're two very different episodes there, and some people listening. The first example, the fellow who thought that you'd have a lovely lagoon to slip into when you got home, he wasn't trying to hurt you. That is a racial prejudice that he's displaying, but it wasn't malicious. It was just ignorant, right? Or not right?
The thing is, sometimes it's not obvious.
Yes.
Sorry, when I say not obvious, it's not words. But my God, you get that feeling. And even a friend of mine who's white, she said, I will never know what it feels like to feel that to experience racism. She said that. Her son is of mixed heritage, but she said it to me. She said she wouldn't know. But, yeah, I get what you're saying, but would you have said that to a white nurse that was Irish? Or Scottish, or from
a nice loch. He might have said, you can go home and have a swim in a nice loch.
Yeah, or say she was Jamaican, but she was white, or Chinese.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
She didn't have a strong accent.
I hear you, yeah. But I guess I was just talking about gradations of racism and not excusing the former, merely pointing out that must have been a little bit easier to deal with, or a lot easier to deal with than the latter example, the second. Thank you, Jackie. It's 11:31. A couple of phone lines free. If you're quick, you can grab. I've got another Jackie up next in Birmingham. Honestly, you wait weeks for Jackie to come, and then two come along at once. 0345 6060 973 as you need. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. It's 11:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I just thought this was quite amusing. Someone told me he's getting paid £1 million for his column in the Daily Mail. First one was about diet pills, was it, or something? I can't. Second one was about, I've forgotten. Can't remember. But anyway, Boris Johnson, remember him, is writing about ULEZ this weekend, which obviously the usual suspects are trying to inflate into a major story while not mentioning that scrappage schemes have received government support in all the cities that aren't Labour run, like London. So no government support for an even more generous scrappage scheme in London. But here is Boris Johnson. I don't know if you're aware of this. I find this stuff, well, actually, because I've been really, really, really cracking on with the book now, entering the home straight. I'll be finishing it on holiday. I'm off at the end of this week. I tell you what is most interesting. It's called How They Broke Britain, and it is an account of what they did, how it happened. You know, some of it by accident, some of it by design. But it's all in plain sight. That's the thing that I keep stepping back from the keyboard and going, how did they get... I mean, this is all known. Sometimes when you see it all in one place, it's unbelievable. But it's the bare-faced cheek of it. I can't sound like a sort of character out of 1950s. It's the bare-faced cheek of it. But it is. I can't think of a better phrase. It's the bare-faced cheek of it. It is literally the way that they'll hold one thing in their right hand and another thing in their left hand and expect you to completely ignore the thing in the left hand while focusing. I mean, listen, here is Boris Johnson in... I think in 2013, right? This is Boris Johnson in 2013.
The vision in a nutshell is that by 2020, almost all the vehicles driving in central London in working hours of the day will be at or near zero tailpipe emissions through one kind of technology or the other. We're now working on the timetable to achieve that.
Boris Johnson wants to impose tough new restrictions on every vehicle driving in central London.
The mayor insisted the new zone was all about cutting pollution and not raising money. But the driver of any vehicle which broke the rules would be fined.
On my way here today, I overtook a 8-litre Maserati something or other on my bike that was, there it was, dawdling in traffic, emitting prodigious fumes. And I thought, one day, that guy is going to have to get a cleaner vehicle.
So that was 2013, right? And here he is, same bloke, 2023.
Have a look at my column in the Daily Mail, all about Sadiq Khan's odious, unjustified tax on driving, the new ULEZ charge he wants to bring in from August. Nothing to do with air quality, everything to do with the Labour Mayor Khan's bankrupt finances.
Incredible, isn't it? Genuinely incredible. But it must be awful getting given evidence of your own gullibility every day. But my goodness me, how does that make you feel if you're still swallowing his bilge, still swallowing his snake oil? He doesn't even pretend to be honest anymore. 10 years. Situation, of course, has got worse globally. 10 years ago, accepting rounds of applause for introducing an ultra-low emission zone, suggesting London could have the first one ever. 10 years later, London's got one, and it's expanding, and Boris Johnson decides to attack. I just thought that was, even by his standards, I thought that was the barefaced cheek of it, chaps. The barefaced cheek. Back to racism in nursing. A few of you, actually, speaking of Boris Johnson, have expressed or reminded us that if you're going to be, Wasim points out, if you've got someone who can become Prime Minister after talking about watermelon smiles and pickaninnies and letterboxes, then you can hardly be surprised when NHS staff have to deal with it on a daily basis. And that is, of course, also, Wasim, a valid point. Jackie's in Birmingham. Jackie, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
yeah,
Jackie.
It just brought back memories of when I qualified as a second career as a nurse in 2005. I went into community nursing, and I was doing a lady, seen her quite regular, coming to the end of her treatment. So we said, right, you're going to need some specialist stockings that could prevent your leg ulcer returning.
Right.
They come in several colours, several shapes.
Yeah.
I'm at her foot, washing her feet like you do.
Yeah.
And then I suggested to her, and she said to me, oh, do they come in N brown?
Oh.
So I looked at her and I said, I've heard of American tan.
Yeah.
Because if you're born of the 70s, you remember American tan as a colour, but
of course,
not the M brown.
Well, would that have been a phrase in parlance in the 40s or something like that? No.
I'll give you some context. This lady, while she was elderly, she didn't hide her fact that she hated the postman because he was Asian.
Right.
She hated her care worker because she was African.
Right.
And the only one in the team that she liked, ironically, healthcare assistant white.
What did you do? What do you do in that situation?
So I knew I had to be very careful because I'm washing her feet. She's basically insulted me, and she saw the look on my face, and she says, "What? That is a colour." So I looked at her.
You knew exactly what she was doing.
Yeah. So I continued doing my job as you do professionally, because this is what people have to deal with on a regular basis.
Yes.
When I went back to the office, I made it very clear to them, I will not be going back to this woman's house.
Yes.
But to my surprise, the senior said to me, you can't pick and choose, Jackie, where you go to work. So I said to them, the NHS has a zero tolerance for racism. I said, if I insulted this woman in her house, quite rightly, she could phone you and complain about me. I don't have to put up with this. And James, why I phoned, what people don't really understand, the problem that you have in the NHS, because it relies heavily on overseas nurses, in effect, they're like bonded workers. When they're given a work permit, they cannot move throughout the trust. They're recruited to work in the wards that are very heavy, stressful, have high staff turnovers.
Yes.
So it's not surprising, the specialist areas like cardiac, other specialities which are very unique, you will find it's predominantly white. But the areas where it's care of the elderly...
So this is institutional racism?
Of course it is. And this is why what people don't understand, when the NHS is deemed to be a beacon of diversity, all the trust, because of the racism that they know is there, when they look at the statistics, most of the junior nurses in areas where it's diverse will be Asian, African, Caribbean.
Right.
When it gets to the nurse consultant levels, and even the doctors, there's very few consultancies in certain areas where you see diversity. They acknowledge it.
Yes.
Now, my way of dealing with these things, I've had a very zero tolerance from day one. And when they gave me this reaction saying that I can't pick and choose, I said to them, look, I haven't come on a boat. I'm not on a work permit. I'd rather work in IKEA where I get a uniform, a hot dog and fries, and do 10 jobs to get paid for the same job I'm doing here, because I have a zero tolerance. And from that moment, it made me realise I don't have to stay anywhere where I feel I'm not going to get support.
You've told me a lot here, and I get that, and I mean, I'm glad that you reached that point. I wish you hadn't have to. I wish you hadn't been pushed to it. But are you also telling me that if you were working on a visa, or on a whatever it's called, a protected group visa, then you wouldn't have that level of autonomy? You wouldn't be able to turn around and say, "That's it. I'm off. I'm not putting up with this," because you're only. I hadn't thought of that.
Exactly. Yeah, and this is why, unless you personally, even if you're on a work permit, you know you have rights. But statistically, most people on a work permit, because they're so worried about their
yes, I understand what you're saying.
Under supervision, when it comes to your annual appraisal, they feel they can't say anything. And that's why I use my voice. When I see it, I call it out. And it gets to the point where you get tired, because you then become the person that they know they can't mess about with, but at the same time, you've got to pick your battles. That's why I left the NHS. I don't work for the NHS.
I'm sorry to hear that.
But I still work as a nurse, but I work in general practice. Right. Because you
Is it better there? Is it better in general practice?
Put it this way. General practice, most lay people think it's the NHS. They're providing contracted services for the NHS.
Yes.
So it's a business, but it's not a business that they're all about the money, but they are providing a service. So the partners, as long as they see that you have a good relationship with the patient and you're doing what they've employed you to do, 9 times out of 10, you would then pick and choose where you want to work as a nurse. So you find the right partnership where you feel right.
Yeah.
You feel comfortable there. They seem to be kind of like open to having to hear your voice. And I haven't had problems in general practice. I'm not going to say that there's not issues in general practice.
Of course.
Because it depends where you work. But general practice, generally, you'll hear the doctors will give their experience of working in the NHS from different backgrounds because of politics. And I think this is the problem with the UK. Racism is not the main issue, it's class.
Yes.
But because you have to divide people up, it's easy to use race as a problem. But the biggest issue in this country, why the racism seems to be different, where people think it's not the same as everywhere else, because it's classism you're dealing with. And if you think about nursing, the history of nursing, Florence Nightingale, she was a middle-class, upperly mobile woman. She was providing care, and she would get women who probably were from the street to give them something to do that gave them some respectability. So that's why nursing has to deal with this issue of people looking at you as someone walking around with a lamp.
Like service, almost.
It's service.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I completely understand what you're saying. Thank you, because there's a lot of stuff there I wasn't aware of before, which is why we have these phone-ins, so that we can become more aware of what is your daily lived experience and what the rest of us wouldn't have much idea about. A few people, just for the record, explaining that phrase, when it came to thread or even shoe polish, that phrase was popular still in common parlance in the sort of 70s, but that clearly, as Jackie told the story, that old lady knew exactly what she was doing when she used it, and you just wouldn't in those contexts. You just wouldn't. So you don't need to tell me about your nan's knitting anymore. But touching though it is to see those explanations coming in. Thank you, Jackie. It's 11:46. 11:49 is the time. I was just reading about conservation areas there. Do you know what this is, where we are now? Are you ready for this? It's a conversation area. Aha! I'm in Norwich on November the 8th, if you want to come along. The more I plug the tour for the new book, then the more pressure there is on me to finish it. I mean, it's bad enough if it doesn't get published, but imagine if I'm on the road, walking into rooms full of people, or half full of people, depending, of course, on how successful the plugging is. And there's no book to talk about. 10 to 12 is the time. Back to racism in the NHS. And this very important speech going to be given later today by the head of the Royal College of Psychiatrists. The calls have been amazing because you're doing what you always do. You're covering all of it, not just the individual experience, but, of course, the systemic or the institutional reality as well. Lewis is in Rothwell. Lewis, what would you like to say?
Hello, it's first time caller, long time listener. But,
thank you, mate.
Yeah. So I got probably a little bit of a different angle for you. So I was a healthcare assistant in a hospital in Northamptonshire on the elderly medicine wards, and I'm a white man, so for me it's very difficult to experience racism.
Of course.
But obviously, a lot of my colleagues were sort of, Eastern European, African, sort of Asian descent. And you would get comments from patients that would say, oh, I don't want this person working for you, looking after me or whatever you. And that's a very difficult thing to deal with, obviously, because it doesn't, as most people, who work in the NHS know that, sometimes it's not just verbal assault, it's obviously physical assault that you go through. And it's kind of sometimes a little bit dismissed, especially on the elderly medicine wards, because you're, this person's got dementia or this person's got X, Y, and Z. And
doesn't really make it any less hurtful, does it?
No, certainly not, and especially to the colleagues that it directly affected,
Sure.
Especially, be on the men's bay, and, men could be quite volatile, and the ladies, but, the men would be volatile to some of the women that would come on there, and I'd, say, I don't want this person working or, looking after me. Or
just blatantly say it. And when you say it didn't get the reaction you might have expected, presumably it's because people are used to it rather than endorsing it. They've just seen it as part of the process because it goes on so much and for so long.
Yeah, it's definitely softened.
What do you mean? You mean it's got better? What do you mean by softened?
I no longer work for the NHS. I haven't worked for the NHS for about 2 years.
All right, no worries.
So, but yeah, it for me, I mean, like, as in the way it's accepted on the wards is people just brush it under the rug. It shouldn't be that. I've moved on. I'm in university at the moment. So
what did you do? You've got a nervous laugh. I just want to tell people that you're not necessarily laughing at what you're saying, because you find it funny. You've got a nervous chuckle, which is very charming, Lewis. No, I know you are. It's very charming. I just wanted, in case anyone was confused about that. But what would you do? Because this is almost risk assessment territory.
So it probably leads on to why I'm studying in university. I'm studying counselling and psychology.
Yes.
But I'd always speak to my colleagues, and I've always been a person that cares about what's on a person's mind.
Right.
I went to look into being a nurse, or that's why I became a healthcare assistant, and sort of like get an understanding of what was going on.
Yes.
And how to do that. And obviously I realised it wasn't my direct field, but if I would certainly. If someone had said that, a patient had said that about a colleague I was working with that day, I would say, this person has said this about you, so please just be mindful, because they could assault you, or they could be physically, verbally and physically violent towards you. So just be mindful.
God, so that is, no, of course. So you're not, you're actually protecting them, not just from hurt feelings, but from possible physical violence. Thank you, Lewis. Good luck with the studies. Good Lord. Sarah is in Welling. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning. I guess it's similar to a lot of the stories that you've heard. I'm a doctor, and my experience is it's a bit like pick one, anyone. They'll all be crazy. They'll all be random. They'll all be hurtful, traumatic.
Yeah, of course.
But some of the ones that stick out most, I think, was when I was in medical school, actually. So even before I was a doctor, you start feeling these things. He had just given a lady a cancer diagnosis of the fact that she was terminal. It was quite a somber moment, of course.
Yeah.
Had to be respectful, very quiet. And the husband of the patient, as they were just leaving after all of the news had been delivered, he walked past me and was like, "Oh, you look familiar." I was like, "Oh, I'm not entirely sure where from."
Yeah.
He said, "Oh, do you live here?" I said, "No, I think it must have been someone else." He was like, chuckled and said, "I know, it was Crime Watch." And I just was like, well, I didn't register it. And then the oncology nurse who's supposed to support a lot of the discussions that go on and provide extra support to the family and the patient, she laughed along with him and said, "Oh, no, it wasn't that one. It was Rip Off Britain." And
joking?
again, this is legitimately true. I had my colleague there, the consultant was there, and those two, the husband and the nurse, chuckled. And then they carried on leaving, and we all said bye. I still continued saying bye and was pleasant and was fine, not entirely registering what was happening.
No,
and then after I left, my colleague who is white, my medical student colleague who is white, went bright red, and he said, "I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. I can only apologise on his behalf." And that's when it sunk in. And I was like, my goodness, like, how the hell can you get away with saying something like that to someone who is qualifying as and that's just one. And then now I'm a registrar in the hospital. I'm becoming quite senior. And it's day to day. Every single day I'll get elderly patients who will outright refuse. And one told me, "I'm the reason that this country is going to pot. Don't touch me. I want a white male doctor, please, and thank you."
You personally were the reason why the country was going to the pot.
Personally, me, Dr. Sarah.
How do you... you know the question I want to ask you.
Right.
How do you get back up again?
Initially,
Yeah.
Initially I just did. I love medicine. I love helping. I love what I do.
You're obviously very, very good at it. You're obviously very good at it as well.
Trying to be, and I think I'm getting there. But more recently, I think it is taking a toll. I am aware that sometimes at the end of the day, I'm just like, that was a rubbish one.
Yeah.
And I've got 2 little kids, and sometimes I come home with that same energy. And now I'm like, I don't know that it's worth the impact it's going to have on them. That's where the decision making is this actually, the squeeze worth the juice? Is the juice worth the squeeze? But I don't know. I don't know that it entirely is anymore. And so decisions have to be made about, do I continue? Maybe I exit.
You know that the speech that Adrian James is giving today at the Royal College of Psychiatrists International Congress is addressing retention and recruitment as a consequence of racism. So you couldn't really be a better example of the problem he's describing, could you? Because it's the chipping away, isn't it? It's
exactly, that's what it is. Each little one takes a little bit more of you and from you. And in the individual one, probably it's not a big deal. You can laugh with it. Sometimes you laugh it off with your family when you come home. You'll be like, "You won't believe what happened today."
Sure.
And they're like, "It's another one." But the accumulation of it, then you realise actually there's a massive chasm left from all the little things that have been taken away from me, and that's actually quite damaging.
I'm sorry. And you know, of course you know, and it's glib of me to say so, that the massive majority of the people you've helped and looked after would be
there's no question.
Hugely grateful for it.
Yeah.
Do you know what stuck in my craw the most, Sarah, about your stories was the oncology nurse, actually.
That was the one that got me. And it's one thing when the patients do it, or it comes from someone who's, maybe you can excuse it because they've got dementia, like the last caller said, or because they're unwell. But what's the excuse for colleagues? That's where it kind of becomes a bit... And from the inside...
What are they thinking the rest of the time? What are they doing the rest of the time when they're not articulating their...
And sometimes they do. That's not the only time I've had it articulated from a colleague, a professional member. So it comes from both angles, constantly, all the time, morning, night. It just... There's never a time where you're not experiencing some form of this.
Some form of prejudice and aggression. Well, I mean, what can I say? Thank you for everything that you do and have done, and I hope it gets better, not worse. But there is the problem in a nutshell: glib, largely meaningless words offered up in good faith and in sincerity, pretty much reflecting the attitude that the NHS has taken to the issue until relatively recently. I don't know how effective the Race and Health Observatory is proving, but I do know that it was only formed in 2021 to look at the problems that Sarah's been living with for years. In fact, all of our callers this hour have been living with for years. And is there some encouragement in the fact that most of these people were described as elderly? The idea that perhaps these attitudes are diminishing as society progresses? I don't know anymore, because the reverse gear has been engaged so violently in the last few years, hasn't it? Culminating last week or the week before in Conservatives standing up in public and calling for people not to work in care homes or the NHS if they were born somewhere else. Different issue, same problem. It's 3 minutes after 12 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I didn't miss it, Joe. Joe's text to say, did you miss George Eustace's Brexit U-turn? I didn't miss it, but I don't know whether... Do you want me to be acting as a sort of digest? I do that on Twitter. I don't actually do it as much on the radio show as I used to, just bringing every twist and wrinkle of the Brexit disaster to your attention on a daily basis. But George Eustice has been one of the first actual Brexiters to come out and call for liberty of motion, which I told you some time ago would be an inevitable development in the Brexit process when they turned around and called for people from European Union countries to be free to come here to work, but they couldn't possibly call it freedom of movement. George Eustice, former member of UKIP, of course. He's had quite the journey, hasn't he? Anyway, he spent the weekend calling for liberty of motion. He hasn't called it that yet, but they will, or something similar, for under 35-year-olds, which is a little bit ageist. It's relevant to the conversation that we're about to have, actually, but it's not the only story that is Brexit related. Because do you remember when people pretended to believe that being in the European Union had somehow been responsible for the closure of transit factories that then reopened in Turkey, which is, of course, not in the European Union? Vans are in the news again because the Vauxhall Luton plant, the bosses said they're worried about the future because of Brexit. The long-term future of a major vehicle plant and 1,500 jobs could be put in jeopardy if part of the Brexit treaty is not renegotiated. Its plant director has warned. Tenor says Boris Johnson won't be writing about that in his newspaper column anytime soon. And the third Brexit story that I would share with you today is that New Zealand has signed a free trade agreement with the European Union, which is, I am told, I haven't double-checked, measurably superior to ours. And that why would that be? Two things occur to me here. Why on earth would New Zealand sign a deal with a territory that has 500 million customers in it? Why would they give more away if it's 500 million customers as opposed to 60 million? In fact, 500 million customers who've got trade agreements coming out their ears. Who's going to get the better deal? A country with 60 million customers that's desperate for a trade agreement with anybody so that Liz Truss can pretend it's good news and boost her I want to be Prime Minister campaign. Or a country with 500 or 600 million customers that likes to sign trade agreements, but only when they're absolutely clearly to the benefit. Yeah, exactly that. And, of course, George Eustice came out and slagged off the Australia-New Zealand trade deal, or the Australian trade deal, didn't he, as well? So there you go. There's 3 Brexit benefits for you, if you're still using that phrase. And why is it relevant to what we're talking about now? Well, because customer service. Actually, before that, another story you might have missed at the weekend. So this is quite important, actually. At least I think it is. Because I can't believe this hasn't received more coverage. The hosts of a neo-Nazi podcast who launched an attack on the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and their children. No, he's the king now, isn't he? Oh, I've spoilt it. Because it was the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, you see. It was Harry and Meghan who were under attack from a couple of neo-Nazis who, they attacked their son. They attacked Archie. 38-year-old and a 34-year-old both faced jail after being found guilty of encouraging acts of terrorism on Friday, following a trial at Kingston Crown Court. One of them described Archie as an abomination that should be put down in the podcast which the pair used to voice their hatred of mixed-race marriages. Now, it's received some coverage. I found some coverage on Sky News. I couldn't find much anywhere else. I just thought I'd mention it to you and leave you wondering why that might be. Why your favourite chroniclers of Harry and Meghan's lives have elected to leave this chapter out of their usually constant wall-to-wall coverage. It's a grim story. Harry, they said, should be prosecuted and judicially killed for treason. I don't normally mock the appearances of people, but I think when it's people who believe in a master race, you're allowed to. It's worth looking these characters up and wondering why people who believe in a master race always look like them. I won't go into too much detail except to say... It's incredible, isn't it? If I looked in the mirror and saw that, I think I would refuse forever to believe in the possible existence of any master race anywhere in history. But these two characters looked in the mirror, saw what they saw, and decided that they were somehow superior. Biologically superior? I don't know, to Harry and Meghan's children. They also endorsed the murder of the assassination of the Labour MP Jo Cox in 2016. You remember that occurred shortly after Nigel Farage unveiled his poster with profound echoes of Nazi propaganda, and they hailed Brenton Tarrant's 2009 shooting spree in New Zealand, which claimed the lives of 51 people. Vile remarks about the Manchester Arena bombing, homophobic, racist, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, misogynistic opinions, even encouraging their listeners to commit violence, uploading videos to all sorts. I mean, utterly grim conduct. 2 questions for you. Who do you think radicalised them? And why do you think that story hasn't received more coverage? Are they rhetorical questions? The first one's not rhetorical. Who do you think radicalised them? And the second one is, of course, why do you think it's not received more coverage? Probably a little bit easier to answer, because they don't really print stories about Harry and Meghan and their children being attacked by Nazis. They prefer to print stories about how they're the wrong uns and they're the... they deserve the abuse that is often heaped upon them. A bit of a departure there from what we are going to be talking about for most of the next hour. Britain is returning to the gloom of the 1970s. This is due to customer satisfaction collapsing at the fastest pace on record. Now, the story is the story is partly about energy and water utilities. Customer satisfaction in energy and water utilities dropping off the proverbial cliff. But I want to look at the coalface of hospitality and retail as well. And I want to do it. I don't want to do a phone, and it's not North Norfolk Digital. I've got to stop doing this. I say this to you every week. I've got to stop telling you what you shouldn't ring in about. This must be the only phone-in in history that discourages people from phoning in. Don't ring in and tell me about the appalling customer service you received last week. It's kind of where I'm going with this. Because I do want to hear about it, but what I want to hear about more is the systemic problem that you've got here. So I can't imagine anything worse than running a business. We talked a bit to Fred Syriacs about this. Brilliant. I love Fred. And he, talking about the tragedy facing hospitality. You already know that restaurants are operating on suboptimal levels. You know, they are operating short-staffed. They're open and they're short-staffed. That's the good days, because they're open and short-staffed. There are other days when staffing shortages mean that they're not opening at all. And listen, in the same way that just because you've never had a cold doesn't mean that the common cold doesn't exist. If you've been to a restaurant recently where everything was fine, it doesn't mean that the problem doesn't exist. You saw this with supermarkets. Sometimes you look at Twitter and you hear that sort of twanging guitar tune that I shared with you a moment ago, don't you? So someone got, well, they've got tomatoes in my supermarket, so anyone who says there aren't any tomatoes in their supermarket must be lying. You just sort of think, what, how, what, who, where, geez. But it's not about the places where everything is fine. It's about the places where everything is not fine and why. So I think, particularly in hospitality, that what we've got a problem with is the staffing levels plus staffing proficiency. So what I want to do is hear, ideally in the first instance, from people, from recruiters, not about the trouble you're having recruiting, but the trouble you're having with the people that you have recruited. Do you see what I mean? And it's not their fault, right? They've applied for a job and you've had to hire them, even though you probably wouldn't have hired them a few years ago because there would have been a lot more people going for that job. And you're trying to turn them into a brilliant waiter or a brilliant waitress or a brilliant shop assistant. And there's something that's not quite happening. And that's why customer service or customers are reporting that the situation is getting increasingly dire. So why? Why is customer service falling at a rate of knots in this country? Or rather, customer satisfaction is falling at a rate of knots in this country. Hit the numbers now, you will get through, okay? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Why? What is happening? Because it doesn't immediately make sense. Okay, staff shortages, yes, but poorer service from the staff that you've got doesn't immediately make sense. And yes, I will also take your examples of it. So here's the thing, right? Mrs. O'Brien went away recently. And she is, as you would imagine from someone married to me, a woman of simple tastes. But she did want a cheese toastie delivered to her room at a fairly cool hotel, right? And when it arrived, it hadn't been toasted. Now, this is only a small example of what had gone on, and there's a postscript to the story that I'll share with you as well. What it meant was that sandwich, this sort of insipid, because an untoasted toasted sandwich is a very different proposition from a normal sandwich. Do you see what I mean? If you ever made a toasted sandwich, right? You don't put the effort into it. You put a different level of effort into it from what you put into a normal sandwich. You're going to plate up a toasted... Look, it's bread, cheese, bread. Stick it in the toasty machine and it's delicious. You don't need anything else. If you're making a cheese sandwich, you're going to put pickle in it. You may put some salad in it. You're going to cut it more carefully. You're going to... You see what I mean? You see it at the airport sometimes. Something that's ready to go in the toasty machine does not look appetizing, does it? But the sandwich that is being sold to you as a finished sandwich looks appetizing. So this was a distinctly unappetizing looking, soon to be toasted, ideally to be toasted sandwich. But it got all the way from the kitchen to the hotel room without anybody thinking. See, I think this is what this story's about. It got all the way from the kitchen to the hotel room without anybody thinking, this isn't right. I can't serve this up. This looks like one of those things you see in the fridge at Costa Coffee before it gets put in the toasty machine. So it left the kitchen without anybody noticing. It made its way presumably into the hands of the room service staff without anybody noticing. It got to the door you open the door and you hand it to the customer, at which point, and then you ask them to sign for it on a receipt that says toasted sandwich, right? At which point the customer says, this isn't toasted. And a conversation subsequently with someone we happen to know who was linked to the hotel. So we cannot get decent staff. So there are two problems here. We cannot get the staff, problem one, and we know about that. We've talked about that a lot. But we cannot get decent staff. Why? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need, okay? It's 12:16. 19 minutes after 12 is the time. I'm going to put Dave in Idiot's Corner today. He might not deserve it, but I think he does. Dave's been in touch to say, James, put a sock in it. Yes, Brexit was a mistake, or the execution of it was. But if you are so clever, why don't you run for Prime Minister? That way you can put into practice all of your I know best ideas. Dave, you being too stupid to realise how stupid Brexit was is not a reason for me to change career and become your Prime Minister, mate. It's a reason for you to realise the mistake that you've made, admit it, stop dressing it up in nonsense like, oh, it was the execution of it that was the problem, and beginning the process of demanding that the politicians who are in power and have already been elected start trying to mitigate some of the damage that you and all the fellow residents of Idiot's Corner have caused. I am not going to stop pointing it out, mate, for the very simple reason that it's real, as opposed to all the things that you voted for, which were never real. 20 minutes after 12 is the time. Not getting the staff, I understand. Not getting good staff, I don't completely understand. Why is customer satisfaction in this country plummeting? Steve's in Southampton. Steve, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Just want to say I'm a massive fan of yours.
Thank you, mate. That's a great start. Carry on.
So basically, I work for a large supermarket, and I'm sort of lower management kind of level.
Yeah.
And we, as a company, well, in our particular supermarket, we're sort of given targets for customer satisfaction and stuff like that. Our target is sort of below 50%.
What does that mean? How do people answer it, as it were? What do I do? Is it people who bother to fill in a survey? Or... Yeah.
So it's people filling in surveys.
Well, it's skewed then already, isn't it? Because I'm much more likely to fill something in if I've got the hump than I am if I'm either ambivalent or happy.
Exactly, but there are ways to incentivise it, which we do. And if you give a colleague a mention kind of thing, then that colleague will get a bit of a bonus, kind of thing.
Get a pat on the back. So do you recognise? Well, why do you think customer satisfaction is in decline in this country at the moment, albeit that your own store's doing okay?
I mean, I can only speak for retail, but I think it's a lot to do with automation. From when I started working at this particular place, a few years ago to compare to now. It's a completely different store.
So this isn't because of individuals being bad at their job then, or not caring. This is because the customer would rather be dealing with a human being than a robot.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Of course, that's going to be...
I mean, if you go into, larger supermarkets now, I don't know if you, particularly in our kind of case, you might be lucky to see 3 or 4 people on the shop floor doing the shelves. But the main sort of humans will be based on the front end, even though that is declining itself as well. So you're finding customers having to come to the front of the store to ask questions, then go back into the store to find products, because there's not enough people around.
So that's low staffing levels, whether it's deliberate or whether it's wanted or not. That's not poor staff. That's not suboptimal staff. Is that a problem as well?
No, we're trying our best. Trying our best to do the job, but
that's
it's just we feel like we're cut to the bone kind of thing almost.
And 42% might be the target, but it's not exactly ideal from a customer's point of view, is it?
No.
Are there vacancies in the store, Steve?
Mainly for home shopping.
So the people going around the store filling the baskets on behalf of someone else?
Yeah.
And then they come and pick it up?
I mean, being a home shopper is no one wants to do that. Let's put it that way.
Why not?
The shift patterns are horrendous.
Really?
So you're looking at sometimes starting at 3 a.m. and then you finish at 12 noon.
This is it, isn't it? So you forget when you're doing your click and collect or whatever it is, or your home delivery, you forget the human interaction, probably more human interaction on that. In fact, there is. I'd never thought of that. You've got more human involvement in an online delivery than you have in a visit to the shop. In terms of staff, there's much more for the staff member to do to fill that trolley that's been delivered to your house. There's 3 stages in that, isn't there? There's filling the trolley, then getting it from the trolley into the vehicle, and then getting it in the vehicle to your house. That's 3 human interactions. Whereas you go and do your own shop, there's not 1 human interaction. If you do so, I'd never thought of it like that. And I think you probably would. I'll tell you what I hate. I hate standing there, waiting. The thing always goes off. Unidentified item in baggage area, or I'm buying a bottle of wine and they have to come and check that I'm 18. Or what happened yesterday? Some bloke had left his card in the machine. So I scan in everything, and then when I go to pay, the machine goes doolally because the bloke before me's left his card in it. And then I have to stand there waiting. I deliberately not bought wine so I'd be able to slide straight out of the shop. And so then I have to stand and wait for ages. So my customer satisfaction is declining with every 30 seconds that I'm waiting at the self-service till to get a human to come over and just press the store, whatever it is. That's interesting. Jackie's in Bradford-on-Avon. Jackie, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Jackie.
I have a small boutique shop in Bradford-on-Avon, which is a small tourist town, near Bath.
Lovely.
I employ sort of over 40s in the week, women mainly, and at the weekend I have sort of teenage under 20s that work in the shop. So I get all different sides. One of the things that happened for us, particularly after COVID, we're a very customer service based. We have a lot of people who come in who don't see anybody from day to day, and we welcome them. Yes. Come on in. How are you, Mrs. So-and-so?
Yes.
How are you? How's your cat?
All of that.
All of that. We feel we're really part of the community looking after people. But what I find with the younger generation is that they lack awareness. They can't look up and go, okay, that person's just come in, that person wants to try something on, that thing needs to be picked off the floor and put back up on the shelf.
Yes.
They also lack a confidence to interact as well.
Yes.
And I think the big thing I find is they lack a curiosity. So when they come in, they're once a week, they work with me, and they come in, and I'm buying things all the time, and things are moved around.
In the shop?
In the shop, to make it more interesting. And they come in.
Of course. Merchandising, I believe it's called, Jackie.
It's called merchandising,
yes.
It is. And I find that, when they come in, I'll look at them and go, right, go and have a look around, see what's new, see what's changed, see what's different, see what you can... And they can walk around and not see anything different.
And that's different from the same generation 10 years ago. Younger people 10 years ago would have been different.
Yes.
That's interesting. Yes. Why do you think that is?
the other thing I think is that I have a big issue with them on their phones.
Oh, you can't be on your phone on the shop floor.
Oh, so I've walked in and said, sorry, what are you looking for on your phone for?
Yeah.
And they go, sorry. And they know it's wrong because they put it away straight away. And I'm saying, I don't want this look for my shop. But they're frightened not to look at their phone regularly.
That's FOMO. I don't know. Maybe we're sounding like old fogies. Maybe because I'm trying to think back to my retail days when, I had a mobile phone, but only for making phone calls. I don't know whether now I would expect to be able to check it every now and then. Not when there was a customer in the shop who hadn't been greeted yet, but.
But I have.
You have your phone on you. You have your phone on you in the shop, I bet.
I do, and I have an iPad in the shop that they can go on and post things on Facebook and Instagram because that's really important. Yeah, I'll come in and they're looking at their phone. I'm going, are you doing my Instagram on there?
Yeah.
No, because they're doing their own.
Yeah, no,
and I'm like, not in my hours. You need to.
I think that's reasonable. I think that you're perfectly entitled to say, I'm paying you right now, and you're curating your own Instagram feed, or you're filling your own.
Yes, and I think that just I also find what I have to do as well is I go in and I write lists of things for them to do through the day, so that they've got something because there's something different every week, know, to do. But do the tick list. But I try and get them to generate that themselves, but they can't.
Gosh, so you've got. I mean, when did you start noticing this? Do you think?
It's always been that way.
There's no such thing as there is
people.
the perfect member of staff, but when did you start noticing a decline in what was previously normal?
Probably after. Well, no. Yes, probably COVID has had an issue and that kind of thing. But I think it's always been that I've always had that with teenagers, but they've reacted better. They've learned quickly, and they've gone, you know what, Jackie, I've written the list today.
Yeah.
Oh, let me show you. I've changed this around for you.
But you want the boss you want some brownie points. That's my attitude. I mean, I hope we're not sounding like good old days merchants, Jackie. Everything was better in my day. And there are plenty of, as Olivia points out, some of the most belligerent, entitled shop workers I've ever come across are older. How dare your caller say that it's all about young people? It's very offensive. All of my young friends who work in retail work their absolute socks off. But you don't cancel each other out, Olivia. You don't cancel Jackie out. Your experiences are different from hers. I've dealt with some wonderful young people in retail. I used to be one many moons ago. But there is that. Yeah, that is a different thing. The phone thing plus the what can I do so that when the boss comes back that I'm going to be in the good books, as it were. I'm going to be doing the. It's a funny one. Well, I wish you well. Have you ever been to Comedia in Bath?
I have, yes.
What is it? What's the staff like there? Be careful.
My daughter had her hen night there last year.
Well, I don't think there'll be any hen nights on November the 1st when I take my book tour to come.
Oh, you're going there? I'll come and see you.
There you go. That's called marketing. That is, Jackie.
Come and see my shop.
Take care.
Come to my shop in Bradford Avon.
I shall try to. I don't know what yes, I shall try to. It is 12:30, and there you go. That's it. So we've had Norwich and Bath today. What I want to do between now and November, I want to have a day when all 6. I get a call from Bath, a call from Southampton, a call from Birmingham, a call from Northampton, a call from London, and a call from Norwich. And that will be, we need a name for it. That will be the day, that's a bit like Number Wang, isn't it? Well, let's just call it Number Wang. That will be Number Wang if we get all 6 of those. 12:30 is the time. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 12:34 is the time. Customer satisfaction. We're learning quite a lot, actually. Steve in the supermarket explaining, actually, it's a little bit misleading, perhaps, this statistic, in some ways, because your satisfaction with a visit to the supermarket may have absolutely nothing to do with the staff. So I came into this from the point of view of someone who worked a lot in retail a very, very long time ago. Whereas now, your satisfaction levels at the supermarket may have been damaged by the technology and the absence of staff. And then I find this stuff really interesting. You know, I love shop-based conversations, always have done, always will do. It's just that sort of strange penny drop moment where you go, oddly, when you're buying it online, when you're doing a shop for delivery, there's a heck of a lot more humans involved in that process than there is when you're going to the actual shop. It seemed a bit counterintuitive to me, that. And then was it Jackie? We've had three. Was that Jackie? Was it Jackie in Bradford-on-Avon? Was it a Jack? No, it wasn't a Jack. What was the name of the last caller? I'm getting old. But the small retail outfit where you need staff to be hyper. Was it Jackie? That's three Jackies we've had today. You have to be hyper engaged. You have to be hyper engaged with stuff. You come into a little. My mum had a little frock shop in Kidderminster not long ago. You may have known. It was up on Cumberton Hill near the Chippy. And you do know everyone. You do ask how the cat is. You've got someone in there doing a Saturday or something like that. You've got to provide something that you're not going to get in the chain around the corner. And yet some younger people perhaps struggling to grasp that fully. But retail and hospitality, it seems to me, are really in the front line of declining customer satisfaction, but not necessarily for the reasons that I thought it would be. Rob is in Hoddesdon. Rob, what would you like to say?
Hey, James, hope you're well. I think for me, it's about setting people up for success. I've been in hospitality for a number of years now, and I think people tend to, or within the industry, tend to not set people up for success, not set them.
What do you mean? What do you mean? Because you say it sounds a bit jargony, that, and I know you don't mean to, but go on.
I know. I think it's more for me. It's about setting people up to grow and develop. So you set them up to start off with a goal, your expectations. This is what you should be doing.
Okay, that's a really good point. So you've got a really clear idea of what you need to be doing.
Absolutely. So, like the last caller, for example, doesn't want people on her phones. Yeah. That's her expectation. Yeah. Don't let people stand there on the phone. So that's so you set that as a goal to start off with, and then.
But what if they then get? I mean, catering's a little different. Hospitality is a little different because it's much higher pace. So the shop is empty, and I'm going to check.
Empty.
I'm going to check what.
Restaurants become empty.
No, of course. Yeah, that's true. But you said a catering company, so I was thinking more about events and stuff.
Coolio. Yeah, no problems.
So what do you do if a staff member takes their phone out and starts looking at it when you've told them not to? How do you escalate that?
I think it's a kind of three. It's a 3-goal. Yeah, take it out, put it in the microwave. No, I think it's a 3-goal rule for me.
Is it?
Is that if they do it, once, don't do that. Yeah. Come on, sort it out.
That's 2 for 2. If you do it again,
I've already told you that.
If you do it again, it's good night, Saigon.
Absolutely.
Okay, fair enough. I get that. And then you've got a clear idea of what you're doing, which means that sometimes, then what do you do if someone who isn't ready yet, and yet you haven't got anybody else?
Yeah, that's the problem with recruiting arms and legs, and you know what, we've all been guilty of doing that in the past, and I think actually a lot more people are guilty of doing that now, here and now. That they'll do, they'll be
better than nothing.
Yeah, I can coach and grow them, but actually you get to a point where you go, actually, I need them to throw them in into the mix when I need them. So it's such a catch-22 situation, and there's not many people like you get, I suppose, in other countries where people are setting themselves up for a career in hospitality.
Yeah, this is what I keep hearing.
You don't get that now.
This is what I hear this from a lot of people. My friend Natasha's very strong on this. She works in this sector, and Fred Syriac's, of course, a Frenchman who came here very, very young and sees hospitality. He ended up as the maitre d' at all manner of fancy schmancy restaurants and hotels. They just see it as a vocation, and I don't know whether we're going to be able to change that in this country, as opposed to simply importing people for the high-end jobs who see it as a vocation. I just don't know. Thank you, Rob. Peter's in Waterloo. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hey, James. Good morning. Nice to speak with you again.
Likewise.
I own one restaurant, and I'm literally just about to get ready to open a flagship new one. And,
didn't you say that last time I spoke to you?
No, I was trying to survive COVID.
That was it. That was it. Well, good.
We were very low.
So you're back then. You're back in the game, and you're opening a bigger one.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, a bigger one, yeah.
Is it Spanish? What sort of restaurant is it?
Southeast Asian.
That was it. Sorry.
Can I say the name?
Yeah, of course you can, mate.
Yeah, it was Tiki Mango, so it's a modern taste of Southeast Asia, but what we're discovering now, I mean, the problem is almost self-inflicted because of the shortage. Too many people now are promoting too quickly, and we're losing all of that basic fundamental training that makes you become good at what you are. Back in the day, I was a trainee at the Dorchester as a second commie. I mean, that position just doesn't exist anymore.
Oh, really? Even at the Dorchester?
Well, it doesn't, because the problem now is that the industry is becoming monopolized by agency staff that are turning up, working and leaving. And just the idea now of staying somewhere, learning part of your craft, moving somewhere else and learning. Now it's all wages driven. And so businesses are desperate to hold on to the people they have, even though they're not as qualified as they should be to step up. They're promoting people too quickly to hold on to them.
Because they, okay. So it is a real seller's market then, really.
It is, and because of the wages now that are being offered, and just on the flip side, the wages now that staff with a couple of years of experience are demanding, people with less skills are being employed. And because that goes all the way up to management level, you then have weaker people on the floor, but then weaker managers that don't have the depth in knowledge for the training purposes and for developing. And so with the new restaurant now, I'm completely changing tact because...
What are you doing?
Well, we try to employ experienced people, but the experienced people coming into certainly what we do they don't have the skill set. So from a chef's point of view now, I'm hiring all trainees because then they come in with a clean slate and we can train and model them to what we do and how we do it, rather than coming in with, this is how we used to do it, or I used to work for 2 years or whatever.
Yes.
And it's a really complex and expensive.
But what when you've trained them up and then they clear off somewhere else for a higher wage?
Well, and that's exactly what's happening in the NHS and everywhere else, isn't it? I mean, it's a really difficult market right now, and So
when does the new place open?
Well, hopefully 2nd of August. But I have a beautiful, stunning view of Tower Bridge and a 70-seater terrace, so it's going to be a big one.
Oh, glorious! Whereabouts is it? I know that part of town quite well. On this side, is it on the St Catherine's Dock side of the river?
It's on Butler's Wharf. It's the old Cantina del Ponte, next door to Pont de la Tour.
Yeah, that's glorious down there. Do you know, when I first moved to London, I lived down there, and...
well, you used to work on the street of my other restaurant.
Coin Street, just
right.
by Stamford Street. That's exactly right. I was in that Hall of Residence on the LSE Hall of Residence, and is it still on a wet day? If it's hot afterwards, you can still smell the spices coming out of the bricks.
You can, and all the buildings are all named after spices. It's really cute around there.
It's a really lovely part of London. The weird thing, I only mention it because it was a ghost town. It had just been developed, and you had the big Conran restaurant there, but everything else was. I mean, it was like being on the ground floor of something, and now, of course, it's utterly vibrant. I will come and see you, Peter. I'll come and see you. You've got the restaurant open, I've got the book out, then we can share a glass together. All right?
Take care, James.
No, you too. Sticky mango. Just looking at the menu, it looks absolutely glorious. Callum's in Fife. Callum, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James. You're doing well. I've been waiting a long time to speak to you.
Well, here it is. I hope I live up to expectations.
Well, I hope I do too. I was just basically on to put my 2 cents in. I work in a hotel, sort of service job, cleaning, making everything look nice.
Yes.
And,
whereabouts in Fife are it, or don't you want to tell me? Just a bit more specific.
I'm in St Andrews, so it's a golf hotel. So it's 4-star hotels. There's a lot of very rich people who come here.
Yes.
And they expect very high standards.
Yes.
And so obviously if the standards aren't met, then the customers will have their complaints. But from the point of view of the person providing the service, we're not getting paid a great deal here.
No.
And we come in 7 in the morning every day, breaking our back to clean, and it's just very tiring.
Yeah.
And our higher ups, I was getting gypped the other day from my boss saying it's not clean enough, Callum. It's not clean enough, Callum. It's almost as if you don't care.
Right.
And it's like, yes, Peter, you've hit the nail on the head. We don't care. Everybody's showing up to Tesco to click yes, you are 16 on your Monster Energy drink, or bagging up your items in Lidl. Of course they don't care. So they're not going to put in the effort to provide a good customer service until they feel like they're getting adequately remunerated for it.
So you're, that's a conscious thing for you, because this is different. How old are you? Early 20s?
I turned 21 as of yesterday.
Oh, look at that. It's like a zone in there, like a laser brain. So I think, so it's all very well me saying, well, when I was your age, I couldn't wait to get brownie points off the boss, but I was earning enough money to make a proper dent in my life. Do you know what I mean? It was retail then. I could live when I worked in retail in London. I lived in Soho. I could afford the rent on a Soho flat. Whereas you're describing, I mean, it's barely touching the sides of your outgoings. The wage you're getting for putting in proper shifts in hotels.
Yeah. So just to give you an image of how that works, I study in Glasgow, but I'm working in St Andrews because I want to live with my parents.
Yeah.
And on bills and rent, it's about $650 a month.
Right.
And for working 5 days a week, I get about £800, £900, depending on how many hours I've worked in particular. So money that I get to take home at the end of the week is like £100 to £200, depending on how much I've been working.
It's brutal, isn't it? Because that is £800 to £900. That's 40 grand a year. I mean, that's well above average salary.
What, $800 to £900 a month?
Oh, a month? I thought you said a week.
Oh, a week? No. I might have misspoken.
No, my bad. Because I was thinking, crikey, I'm going to get my kids up to St Andrews this summer. I don't know what you're moaning about.
James, I wouldn't be onto the phone to you if I was making 40 grand.
Say the youth of today, eh? They don't know they're born. And how does the one bit I don't get, and this is because of my age, which is why I mentioned it, is that the consciousness of the fact that you're not working as hard as you could. That's the bit that I would find hard, but not because we're different, you and me, but because my experience was so different from yours.
Well, I don't know if you've heard of this thing. There's Reddit. You must have heard the website Reddit, yeah? Yeah.
So
people create threads, and it's a message board. And one that got really popular, there's now a few million people on it. It's called r/don't work or stop work or something like this.
Right.
And it's basically driven by young people, the main user base of Reddit. And the main point of this subreddit is to advocate for not working. It's an anti-work subreddit.
Right.
And I guess that's indicative of a sentiment amongst young people where they sort of see these low-paid jobs as a bottomless pit of time and energy, and they don't see a long prospect. And just to tie it back to some of the previous callers talking about a career, well, I'm a cleaner in a hotel, and there's people who've been cleaning in a hotel for about 20 years. There's a woman called Dementia, she's about 40, 45.
Yes.
And we're both on £11 an hour.
Right.
So for these low-wage service jobs that you are person in this conversation, there's no prospect of career. It's not like a chef where you can move up and move up. If you're a cleaner in a hotel, if you're a waiter in a hotel, you're going to be doing that for the rest of your life. And people get exhausted of it.
Yeah. No, I buy it. And I mean, is there a figure just off the top of your head that would sort of give you wings if you came in tomorrow?
Money-wise?
Yeah.
Well, you can never say a specific figure because it always costs a lot in different places.
No, I'm just wondering, if you came in tomorrow and they said, oh, good news, you're on £18 an hour, would you suddenly become a completely different proposition?
I think I would start doing backflips and I would drop out of uni. And then Peter would be happy with my cleaning then. So,
it's the same for everybody, isn't it? It's the same employee engagement. So proper training would help, but also, bottom line, rewards.
Yeah, I am on my lunch break, so I've got to go. But
you crack on. I'm sorry. It affects how appreciated you feel. Take care. I get up that way quite often, but not usually as far as St Andrews. 12:47 is the time. 12:51 is the time. It's a learning curve. A lot of admiration coming in for Callum. If you are looking for a pay rise, I don't know whether any of the people ringing in to compliment your classy contribution of running businesses in that part of the Kingdom of Fife, but if they are, you should get your CV over there sharpish. Ryan is in Belfast. Ryan, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hey,
like one of your previous callers, I'm also just on the cusp of opening up a new cafe in Belfast. I set the first one up in COVID, crazily, after being laid off from the television industry.
Okay.
And losing my mother at that time.
I'm sorry.
So I just had no choice. I took a punt, and luckily it worked out, and I'm lucky enough now to be setting up a second one. However, the last couple of years, it's been a roller coaster of trying to get staff. But I think, as a business owner, the challenges are there. But as a customer, when I go in and sit down with my family in restaurants and cafes, I see it everywhere.
Yes.
It is chronic, and I think it's a huge cultural thing, and I don't mean to point the finger at younger members of staff and stuff, but they just do not care.
Well, they don't know any better is a nicer way of putting it, I think.
Well, yeah, I try to train them. I try to train them as best I can. I try to pay them significantly more than what they get in rival cafes, bars, restaurants, and I never have ever paid a member of staff minimum wage. It's just something I will not do. That to me is the government telling you that if a business could pay you less, they would. So I always strive to give people a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I am currently getting no thanks for it. Have not got any thanks for it. It's unbelievable. I think a lot of young people they've grown up in a different time. They're detached from the kind of realities that we would have faced.
This is where I worry though, because they said this about us.
I know, and I do. I'm only 33, but I would say
you sound like Methuselah. Honestly,
I know that, and I am conscious of that. But I would say the difference between myself at 33 and someone at 23 and what I was like at 23, it's night and day. I don't know if it's a parenting thing and how kids have been raised, but
you don't know. This is it, isn't it? I mean, this is the bit where I get scared, because maybe we're right. I'm 20 years older than you, so I probably said this about your generation at one point.
James, I can't get young members of staff, to sanitise a table properly. I can't get them to brush a floor or hoover.
Then you heard Callum, You heard Callum, who is clearly bright and is a great adornment potentially to anybody's payroll, but he is so unimpressed by what he's getting paid that he consciously doesn't do the job that he knows he's capable of doing.
Yeah, and I do sympathise with Callum, because he said that what his monthly take-home pay was, and it was shocking, And, I have young members of staff that are in around Callum's age, taking home nearly double or triple that, because
then you'd expect to have a much better performance, wouldn't you?
Exactly. And I really do sympathise with him, but there has to be some sort of balance between what people get paid and a reality for what a business can afford to give out, for the job in hand as well. But I just don't see it getting any better.
Well, what are you going to do? So Peter is opening a new place in August, and he's going in from scratch, starting with people with no experience, nothing, and training them completely. Then, of course, you run the risk of them clearing off somewhere else.
Yeah, well, I have actually I started that kind of strategy when I opened up the first business, which is in like a satellite town about 20 minutes outside of Belfast, and this one now is in the centre of Belfast between a couple of university campuses and stuff, and I've actually found that there's a much higher calibre of applicant applying to the city jobs, which you would expect.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't know what the future holds. I don't know whether those people will bounce between jobs very quickly, whether there's going to be any sort of reliability. But I have just for the peace of mind to get myself up started and to get a good run of things, like I have paid more than what I would have in other places, just to kind of
to try and get the pick of the crop,
lock down that experience and get the pick of the crop, and if that's what it takes. But the young people coming in, just it's generally they don't care. I think they've lived their lives on Instagram looking at millionaires and celebrities, and
we
they
definitely said that 20 years ago about people your age, because it was X Factor. You all think you're going to be pop stars. But it is, but you're there, you're at the coalface and you're not finding the staff, and it would have been easier to find the staff at previous times. When does the place open? What have you got a date?
Next Monday.
Next Monday? What are you doing on the radio, Ryan?
I was thinking that myself. But
what's it called? Do you want to tell people what it's called? It's entirely up to you.
Yes, it's the Mill Cafe. It's a bagel cafe called the Mill. It kind of suits the demographic in the area that I'm in. And
whereabouts in Belfast is it going to be?
The Stranmillis area of Belfast, so in between the Queen's University colleges and the Stranmillis College. So fingers crossed I can find a few good students around it. Yeah. Because, there
different
are
dynamic. Different students are doing it in addition to being students, and therefore they bring something slightly different to work, potentially. I wish you well, Ryan, I really do. I'm just cracking on so I can squeeze in one more call. Alex is embarking. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. It's just a very quick one, to be honest. I feel a lot of the problem is people aren't making their staff feel that appreciated for the work that they do.
Definitely.
Whereas I read a saying years and years ago on Facebook: teach your staff enough to leave, but treat them well enough that they don't need to. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
and I feel like
I like that. Could be a bit pithier. Could be a bit pithier. Are you sure you've remembered it correctly?
I'm not 100% sure now that you
could be a bit catchier. Could be a bit catchy, couldn't it? I mean, God, but I understand the sentiment.
No. Yeah, but so basically, I've worked at the O2 for 11, coming out, it'll be 12 years at the end of the year.
Right.
The wages aren't that great.
Sure.
But I've done a wide range of things. Now, the reason I won't leave is because even if it's something small that I've done, if I've helped an extra hour after my shift or whatever, they make you feel appreciated. Your efforts are actually shown, and it's not just we'll give you extra money. Managers come out and they say to you, "Do you know what, thank you so much. You really, really helped," and they actually kind of show you the results of your help, if that makes sense. Whereas if you just tell someone, "Oh, do this, do that. This needs to be done. That needs to be done."
Oh, just a bit decent. A bit, yeah. I don't know. And do you know, I go to the O2 quite a lot, and now that you mention it, the staff always do seem to be happy, and that's half the battle, isn't it?
Precisely. That's what I'm saying. The O2 is one of them places you can have the worst day of your life. So a plane can come and crash into your bedroom window, wipe out your family. Within an hour of your shift, you're going to be in the greatest mood ever, and I can't quite figure out why it happens or how it happens. It just happens.
Why do you hate your family so much?
You know what I mean? Like, it's just,
I do. Are you working on Friday?
Well, I mean, I'm off at the minute. I'm kind of tasting the waters for a new job right now. Only because
you've been there a long time. No, I'm there on Friday. That's all. I'm there for Jack Whitehall, so I thought I'd say hello if you were in the building.
I'll keep my eye out for you.
See you later, man. Thank you, Alex.
Cheers,
Take care.
No.
That what a lovely hour that was. I've given me hope, and of course, final word to Andy in Portsmouth. James, he said, so if you can't afford rent or a mortgage on what your full-time job pays you, then why on earth would you be putting in a proper shift? It means that the company is not paying a fair wage. Or it means the economy is so completely screwed that no one knows what day it is. It is Monday, just to clarify. It's coming up to 1 o'clock. You've been listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We'll do it all again on tomorrow from 10. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Global Player, catch up, rewind live radio, enjoy the whole show podcast. Titchmarsh on Full Disclosure this week, which is a real treat. All of LBC's shows are there, as well as the latest news from LBC. So do rewind live radio on Global Player. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Sawbrick with you at 4. Now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 Now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.